Okay, hello and welcome to the Cross to Bear podcast. My name is Phil Bear, if you didn't know that already, and I have a couple of guests that are going to be on the show with me today, and I'm excited to have them. They're two of my favorite people in the whole world. So let me bring them on. First, I want to bring Juan on. I'm a poet and didn't know it.
Hi, hello, Phil.
Juan from Modern Atheism. How are you doing? It's a pleasure to have you.
Good and you. Thank you. Yeah. Thanks for having me. It's a
Yeah,
pleasure
good.
to be here.
Uh, so are you? Is this kind of a a bad time of day for you? Are you exhausted from work and
Oh,
things like that, or
no, I just, you know what happened? They canceled my work today. I was supposed to work, but they one guy didn't show up and I cannot work alone. So I got the day off actually. So it was pretty cool because I would
Oh,
have been tired, but now I'm fine.
okay. Well, then we'll look forward to you being your sharpest today.
Yeah.
Let's bring Dale on. Also, Dale Glover is another one of my favorite guests, and he's kind of an official co-host in a lot of ways. So, hi, Dale. How are you doing, and how are things standing there in Jerusalem?
Yeah, I'm good. The weather's great in Jerusalem at this time of year. Yeah, I'm looking forward to this show. This is sort of, so I didn't announce it to my audience, but last week was kind of my last week, as a season finale of Real Seekers, where I'm supposedly taking a podcast vacation to work on certain things like writing my book and stuff like that and finishing that off. So this is my first post season show, I guess we can say.
Mm,
So yeah, there we go.
okay, great. I'm gonna move myself. Oh, that's too much. There we go. My logo was covering me up. So, well, good. And what's your book about, and when is it going to be published?
I want to get it. I'm hoping to get it done after by the summer, the end of summer. It, plus or minus a couple months and stuff like that. But it's going to be on the Shrine of Turin, and I'm trying to make it into a deductive argument. So that's the structure of the book itself. Essentially, kind of akin to saying, look, it's a design argument that argue the images on the Shroud of Turin. They're either due to random chance, physical mechanisms or necessity, or intelligent design. I rule out the other two options. Therefore, they're due to an intelligent design. And then the next part is, well, if it's due to intelligent design, it's either due to a human artist or God. And then I rule out the human artist and I say, therefore, God designed them, kind of thing. So that's, in a nutshell, what the argument is for the book.
Well, I approve of providing logical arguments in your book. That's
Absolutely.
always a good thing. And and I actually want to express my appreciation to Juan today because a while back, I don't know how many months ago it was, Juan and I had a debate that you actually moderated, Dale, and we had a debate on the resurrection of Christ. And and that actually inspired me to take all the notes that I have accumulated over the years on the resurrection and put them into a book.
Mm. Yep. Craig
So
Blomberg, he endorsed it, kind of thing.
yeah, so let me show the book cover real quick. It's called The Knowable Resurrection, and the foreword is written by Dr. Craig Blomberg, who is one of my favorite New Testament scholars. And in fact, I consider him one of the leading New Testament scholars in the world. And so he was excited to write the foreword for it. And I shared with him what I had talked about during the debate. And I shared with him what I wanted to write in the book. And he thought this was just a great approach. And so he was very excited about it. And I really want to express my appreciation to Dr. Blomberg for being willing to write the foreword. He was very kind to me, and so So thank you, Juan, for inspiring this project.
Yeah, you're
And
welcome. That's cool. Yeah.
yeah, and I think our debate on the resurrection, I think it was productive, and I appreciated the way that you approached the debate, and so I think it's an honest approach that you take. And so I thought I wanted to deal with some of these things honestly myself. And so hopefully I can rise to the level of integrity that you've brought to the table. And whether I've accomplished that or not, the reader will have to decide. But I wanted
I feel
to,
like if I'm hearing this right, it sounds like you have more respect for Juan than Godless Granny. Is that correct?
well, I'm afraid I do. Yeah, I'm sorry. I just, yeah, I think it's kind of unfortunate when someone goes on the air and openly admits that they don't have any philosophical training or any philosophical background, and then crank out videos and podcasts where they're doing nothing but philosophy after having said that they don't have any training in philosophy. So what happens is that, unfortunately, she just makes logical fallacy after logical fallacy, and she doesn't even know she's doing it, and she's not trained to avoid logical fallacies, and so she cranks them out like a fire hose. And to me, I just think that's just kind of unfortunate, and it doesn't really reflect well on her. I don't think. And one of the examples is I did a video as a response to some of the things that she was saying about a review of my book Machines Don't Laugh. And I I made this video that pointed out all the logical fallacies in her review. And so I called the video Stepping on the Rakes. And stepping on rakes and where the handle flies up and hits you in the face is kind of a metaphor for committing logical fallacies and you don't see them coming, and so she said that that was an ad hominem attack on her, and that's just one more example of misunderstanding on her part about what fallacies are, because the ad hominem fallacy is not what I did. I simply pointed out that she was making logical fallacy after logical fallacy, and that it was just like witnessing somebody walking across the yard and stepping on rakes and having those rakes the handle fly up and hit them in the head, and so that's what's going to happen when you don't have the kind of philosophical background that you need in order to be able to conduct a podcast like that, and to have a channel like that. So but that's not intended as any unkindness toward her. And the fact that I don't respect her work very much doesn't mean that I don't respect her as a person, and doesn't mean that she doesn't deserve respect. It just means that we have to call a spade, and we have to expose the mistakes that people are making, because those mistakes have consequences. So anyway, that's all we'll say about that. But what I wanted to do today was I wanted to talk about some of the actual topics of discussion that, Juan, you had with Godless Granny. And one of the main areas of that discussion was the logic of the Trinity. And so I wanted to talk about that today, and I wanted to just kind of throw out some proposals for reframing the understanding of the Trinity so that it is a little bit more accurate and a little bit more coherent. And so what I hear quite often, and I think that I heard this during your discussion with Godless Granny, and so, Juan, please correct me if I've gone off the rails here, but I think that one of the parts of your discussion had to do with the fact that the Trinity is illogical. And is that a fair summary of what you were discussing with Godless Granny?
Yeah, there is this thing called the logical problem of the Trinity. You know, you may have heard of that. Is the philosophical question of how is it possible that Jesus is God, the Father is God, and the Holy Spirit is God at the same time. So they are the same thing in a way, but at the same time they are distinct. They are not each other. The Father is not the Son, like it's not identical
Right.
to the Son. And I've been reading this book. I just bought it. This it's flipped. One is one God, three persons, four views. It's a book that features a dialogue between different scholars on the Trinity. It has William Lane Craig, B.O. Branson, Del Toggi, who is an Unitarian, and some other guy, I think William Hasker or something like that. Yeah,
Okay.
and it's a shame.
Well,
Yeah,
I'm familiar
yeah,
with William Lane Craig, and if anybody would have a coherent response to that kind of argument, it would be him. And so I'm curious. I haven't read that particular book, but I have heard William Lane Craig discuss the Trinity in various contexts. And so and you just got that book, and so you haven't read through it yet.
yeah. I haven't had the time to finish it. I just bought it this week, so
Okay.
unfortunately, I'm not super prepared. But I'm planning to get into I want to get into the topic of the Trinity. I want to make this one of my special topics. I'm good at, yeah.
Okay. Well, that's great, and that's actually a commendable project for someone who identifies as an atheist or an agnostic. I mean, a non-believer essentially, and so the fact that you're willing to pursue and explore that topic, I think, is extremely productive. So and maybe what we could do is we could have a part two of this discussion after you've digested that book. But I but today I think we can actually cover a few maybe starting points. I'm not sure that that Dale and I would be able to just settle the matter for you and for everybody, but I think that there are some roads that we can begin to start to travel down in order to help address this issue. And so in general, my opening comment about this would be that that the Trinity is not a problem in logic. It is basically a problem in faulty understandings of the Trinity. I think that's where the incoherence lies. I don't think it lies in the actual doctrine itself. I think it lies in the misrepresentation and the confusion about what the doctrine actually teaches. And in my worldview, I mean, I'm an evangelical Christian and have been for decades. And in my worldview, Christianity does not contain any contradictions. So it does not contradict itself. And the way that I apply that is that I would say that none of the doctrines of Christianity are contradictory either, or self-contradictory, or logically incoherent. And part of the reason why I'm committed to that posture is that if God exists, and if the God of Christianity exists, and if Christianity is true, then the laws of logic are actually grounded in the mind of God himself. And if that's the case, then it would be logically impossible for God to be illogical. And it would be logically impossible for any aspect of his nature to be illogical. And so that's why I'm interested in this problem of the Trinity, and because I hear non-believers, skeptics, atheists, and so on, and sometimes even people of faith will say this, that the Trinity is self-contradictory, that it's illogical, it's incoherent, cannot be logically sound. And so the really the fundamental answer that I begin with is that if the Trinity was a claim that there are three gods, then that would actually that would actually repudiate monotheism, because monotheism states that there is only one God. And so the first suggestion that I would make is that the Trinity does not propose that there are three gods. It proposes that there is only one God. So the second aspect of this is that the doctrine of the Trinity states that even though there is one God, that God is made up of, so to speak, is composed, so to speak. This is imperfect terminology when you're dealing with a supreme being, but he is composed of three distinct persons. And so that's where the fundamental confusion often lies, because people will say, well, if the Father is not the Son, and the Son is not the Holy Spirit, and the Holy Spirit is not the Father, then what you have is three distinct gods. And I immediately reply to that by saying, no, wait a minute. We didn't say they were three distinct gods. We said they were three distinct persons, but they all share the same essence as God. So the Father is God, the Son is God, the Holy Spirit is God, but they are not the same person. So you have one God, three persons, not three gods and not one person. You have one God and three persons. And one of the refrigerator magnet slogans that is used to describe this all quite often, I'm sure you've heard this one, is one what and three whos. And so if you separate and make a distinction between the ontological categories of a God and of a person, then the logical and mathematical problems all evaporate. So that would be my starting point in this whole thing. And Dale, I'm sure that you've studied the Trinity to a certain degree, and so what I want you to do is I want to turn the floor over to you and ask you to comment on what I just said.
On what you just said. Okay, so yeah, I mean, I think I agree with what you're saying there, Phil. That God is one what, right? He's one being, ontologically speaking, with three who's, right? Three personal essences or individual essences, kind of thing, which are unique and distinct. So I agree with you. I think, yeah, I think I fully agree with everything you were saying. I take Dr. William Lane Craig's view, and I'm heard my debate. I'm famous for arguing with the Muslim metaphysician on it and stuff like that. So I've debated this topic. I've read the book. I'm personal friends with three of the authors of that book. I've had Bo Bronson on the show representing Orthodoxy's view. So his view is basically he wants to make it consistent with the creeds, which I think does entail the logical problem of the Trinity that Juan alluded to in the beginning, where it just entails logical contradiction and incoherence. So I think you have to abandon the creeds. And the good news for me and Phil is we don't care what later man-made traditions say, so long as our model is consistent with what the Bible says. And on that front, I think the Bible describes, look, that each of the three divine persons share in the divine identity of Yahweh, and that's what the Bible talks about. The Bible focuses on this question of who is included in the one identity of Yahweh. And on that front, we have the three divine persons. And then starting in the 2nd century, that's when philosophy starts trying to make sense of the what questions. Okay, well, how do these parts relate to each other and that sort of thing? And so that's where I go with Dr. William Lane Craig's Trinity monotheism model, which is a social Trinitarian model. It
Right.
emphasizes there are three separate persons and individual essences and that sort of thing. And I would say these are parts of one God. So there's one divine soul, that's Yahweh proper, that's the Godhead, God, right? and it instantiates three divine persons within that soul, kind of thing. So, in a nutshell, that's what the Trinity monotheism model is, and that's fully consistent with the Bible. It contradicts later creeds, but I don't really care. Um, and, yeah, that in a nutshell is the model. Yeah, yeah, and I've debated Dale Tuggy, who's probably the best skeptic in the world. I'm friends with Tuggy. Yeah, he's been on my show several times, right? So
You mean
he's the one
Juan
who
is
wrote.
better than Juan?
Oh yeah, oh Tuggy's probably the best. He's the one who wrote the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy article on the Trinity. So he's like the top expert in the world and stuff. So
Yeah, yeah, I
Mhm.
read that.
yeah, yeah, great. So yeah, that's where I stand. It sounds like from what Phil said, he hasn't ironed. I don't think he has a specific model, but everything he said sounds consistent with my model, the Trinity monotheism model. So I'm happy with everything you said there, Phil, so far.
Yeah. And one of the things that I think is often neglected whenever discussions of the Trinity will occur is that it's almost, I don't want to say a waste of time, but it's 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 kind of a it's kind of a problematic thing to try to come up with some kind of analogy or model to describe an ontological singularity like God. And what often occurs is that people will come up with analogies, and so I've heard an analogy of a man who is a father, and he's a father to his children, but he's a son to his father, and he's a husband to his wife, and they try to use that as an analogy to say that this is what the Trinity is like. Well, the problem is that breaks down because I am one person, even though I play different roles, and so the Trinity is not one person playing different roles, and and so that kind of analogy actually breaks down completely. And there are other analogies that people have tried to come up with, the four-leaf clover and all sorts of things. And all these analogies, they just break down at a certain point because what we're trying to do is we're trying to describe something that we have no analogy for. We have no counterpart for ontologically in our human experience. But I would argue that the Trinity and that the Godhead, the reality of the Godhead, actually makes sense of all of the rest of human experience. And if that's the case, then I think we have a coherent worldview that provides satisfactory answers to all the big questions of life. But I'm not sure that we'll ever be able to come up with a perfect model that actually describes or defines the Trinity itself. And again, it's because it is an ontological singularity. And so what I want to do is I want to turn it over to you, Juan, and I want you to comment on this, and I want to ask if you think that this resolves any potential logical contradiction.
Yeah, so a few things. I think it's very interesting that Dale says that he doesn't, he has to abandon the creed, because I think I see it in my view as a big concession almost. I mean, some people will say, well, it's almost like if you consider the debate almost like, I mean, not quite, he will, but because like the problem is making the creed be logical. And many Christians are committed to defending the creed. Like Catholics will have to defend the creed. I think Orthodox, but I think Dale doesn't need to do that. And or William Lane Craig, for example, William Lane Craig has the. Some people have said that he's a bit unorthodox at times. He can be like he can stray away a little bit too far from orthodoxy. For example, he denies divine simplicity, and he has made also content on against this, and that's something many Christians find problematic, right? Especially the Thomist, the Catholic Thomist philosopher kind of guys. Uh, so yeah, no, I think William Lane Craig does solve the strong logical problem of the Trinity, but this comes at a cost of almost denying orthodoxy, right? Because it's no longer the orthodox view. That's not really the right. And let me see let me tell you what I think is the main problem here with that model. What I see as the big difficulty. So Dale explicitly says that these are parts of God. The persons are part. He said that explicitly. And Phil, you didn't say this explicitly, but you say that God is composed of three persons, and composition usually implies parts. Normally, when a thing is composed of other things, well, those are the parts. So you
And
didn't say it explicitly. So that's, yeah, my view is, yeah, I
let me
mean,
just let me just interrupt you for just
yeah,
real
yeah, go ahead,
quickly.
go ahead.
And I'm sorry to be rude, but
Yep.
you'll notice that when I said composed of or made up of, I said so to speak, and so I'm not actually committed to the fact that God is composed of multiple parts. That is imperfect language that we use so that the layman can hopefully have a chance of tracking with what we're saying. And so the better term to use would be that God consists of three persons. And I think if you use that term, I think that avoids the composition problem. And so I just wanted to clarify that real quickly, but I didn't mean to interrupt.
No,
Well, I did mean to interrupt, but
that's okay.
I didn't want to interrupt.
Yeah, that's
I
fine.
don't.
It's not a formal debate. You can interrupt. It's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. Oh, here's what I wanted to say. Is the task of the Christian is not just to solve the logical problem of the Trinity. You also have to solve it without getting into the heresies. You have to solve it without going into partialism and without going into modalism, which is also what you said. You say you cannot say these are different roles because that sounds like modes in a way. So you can also not go that way. So you have to solve it in a way that does not include these things. I think that's a difficult problem, right? So I mean, the other, yeah, there wants to
I
say
just ask-
something.
I just want to. So I just want to ask you because I don't accept your terms. Like, why? So in terms of partialism, that's easy to avoid, right? That's so William Lane Craig. I define what type of part. These are essential, non-divisible parts, so that they can't be separated, and therefore it doesn't entail the. That's the problem with partialism. That's why it's a heresy, right? Because you're implying the parts can be separated from each other. So no, these are essential, non-divisible parts, and then it's not a problem, kind of thing for me. Now, the thing I wanted to ask you though is why am I having to be um, consistent with the creeds? Why is that the job of a Trinitarian, a Christian, biblical Trinitarian Christian, to have to come up with a model that's consistent with the creeds, which I would argue is impossible because they're just not logically coherent.
No, I see that from my experience. They usually try to be consistent with the Christian. What Christians do, they have. And when I see discussions about it, one of the things they're going to say is you cannot deny the creed. I know some. I think Catholics are committed to
Yeah,
defending the creed. I think Orthodox might.
Catholics, Orthodox,
Yeah,
even Protestant. Look, me and Phil did a show on the Council of Nicaea. We deny elements of that. Even certain, not William and Craig, but certain most Christians who are Protestants, like David Russell, they want to be consistent at least with Nicaea and Chalcedon when it comes to the incarnation.
yeah.
But I'm
Why?
just saying, even with those, there are problems with those creeds. So I still see no obligation to be fully consistent with
No.
those creeds either.
Yeah. No, that's okay. I don't know the reason really, but you just said they want to be consistent with those creeds. Okay, I will ask you why, and I think if you respond why, then you will also the answer will be also for yourself. Like, I don't. There is have to be a reason why they want to be consistent with those creeds, don't you think? This
Yeah.
it goes beyond my
Well,
uh,
well, for
work.
Catholics and Orthodox, it's easy because these man-made traditions for them are not man-made traditions. They're equal to Scripture. These are inspired, authoritative, binding things. So they don't have a choice. They have to make it consistent, and that's why people like Bo Bronson get all twisted up with these models that just don't make sense, really, kind of thing, right? But
And Juan, I resonate with that question. When you say why do Christians feel the impulse to be consistent with the creeds? I have asked the same question because I see Christians walking around trying to defend the creeds and trying to emphasize the importance of the creeds, that the creeds are somehow some kind of essential component of the Christian faith, and that if you don't subscribe to this to the creeds, then you are less than a Christian for in some way. And my question has always been, why? No one has ever given me a reason why I need to be a slave to the creeds, and that's really pretty much what it is in my view. I don't feel any compulsion or any obligation to be, to be a slave to the creeds. And I think that many times people consider the creeds authoritative, but who put their stamp of authority on the creeds? It was like Emperor Constantine and, and other man-made offices are putting their stamp of approval on a creed, and they're saying this is what all Christians must believe, and if they, in order to stay Christians. And my question is, well, then did Christianity not exist until the creeds came along? Did Christianity not exist at the close of the first century? And so my whole my whole focus on doctrinal clarity and what I call orthodoxy is to remain true and faithful to the Bible. And if the creeds did not exist, nothing would change in Christianity. Christianity would still be Christianity because it's rooted ultimately in the scriptures. And so I don't, I guess I have to disagree that it's a problem for Christians to affirm the Trinity in a way that contradicts the creeds. I don't think that's a problem for a Christian at all, because I think the problem for the Christian is someone who gave such heavy credence to the creeds in the first place. Notice what I did there? Creeds, credence. So I mean, does that help one? Because uh, not all Christians are that enthusiastic about the creeds. Dale certainly isn't. Now, do I think the creeds are worthless? No, I think that they can be helpful, but ultimately the creeds are not authoritative. They don't carry any kind of divine authority in themselves. And so we can treat them as ways to clarify certain Christian doctrines and to help us understand systematic theology, maybe in a little bit more organized way. So they can be helpful, but it's extremely dangerous to consider them authoritative and to think that if we don't actually subscribe to the creeds by the letter, word for word, that somehow that creates a problem for a Christian or a problem for Christianity. And I also really quickly, I don't want to ramble on too long here, but I quickly I want to talk about the terms orthodoxy and the terms heresy, because a lot of times people will define orthodoxy as faithfulness to the creeds. And I don't consider that to be the definition of orthodoxy. For me, the definition of Christian orthodoxy is faithfulness to the scriptures. And the word heresy is thrown around quite often. And I just want to point out that the term heresy is a man-made term. The term does not exist in apostolic Christianity. The term heresy actually was derived from later church institutionalization. And so heresy can become a weapon against people who disagree with someone's theology. And I don't think that there is any particular official or authoritative definition of what constitutes a heresy and what doesn't. And so that term is just simply hanging out there in the air. And I don't care about it. If that term exists, if it was just simply eliminated from all human dialogue, it wouldn't change a thing. So so I don't think you have to worry about whether Christians are actually in danger of a departure from Christian orthodoxy, as long as you define orthodoxy in a proper way and not in a man-made way, which I think often occurs.
Okay, you say the term heresy does is not in the gospel in the scripture. Isn't there a part in Paul where on one of his letters where he warns about people with a fake gospel or something like that, something along those lines?
Yeah. Yeah, so in Galatians 1, chapter 1, verses 8 and 9, I believe, it says that that if any man or angel preaches a gospel other than the one that you receive from us, let them be anathema, let them be under a curse. And but the term heresy is not in that verse. And some people will make that a standard and will say if anybody preaches a gospel that's different than the one the apostles preached, then they're preaching heresy. And if they want to use that term in a stipulative way, then I'm not going to argue with them. I don't have a dog in that hunt. I don't care if they want to do that. But we just need to understand that that term is not in the scriptures. What the scriptures do is the scriptures actually oppose false doctrine. They don't do it by coming up with some kind of term like heresy. They don't codify it that way. They simply oppose false doctrines. And that's all there is to it. And that's all we need to do. We, as Christians, we need to oppose false doctrines, and the definition of a false doctrine is something that the Bible contradicts. So does that scratch where you itch on that, on the term
Yeah,
heresy?
yeah, no, yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Just Phil, just so you know, I'm keeping track. I don't know if you care or not at this point, but there are like questions from the audience. So are you waiting for them at the end, or do you want me to notify you throughout?
I am a bad host.
Just so you guys know, I have no control over raising the question, so you can blame Phil and send your angry emails to him.
Yep.
If,
Yeah, I typically get caught up in the discussion so much that I tend to neglect the chats in the for the audience. So yeah, if anybody does want to ask a question, I think definitely go ahead and ask. But I also wanted to make sure we got through the material, and what I'd like to do is see if we can exhaust this discussion if it's possible to exhaust it. I don't know whether or not I want to be able to cover the topic, and then turn to questions after we cover the topic. And I'm not sure that we've necessarily covered the topic yet, but I want to I want to throw out to both you and Juan. Do you think we are on the right track here? Have we are we on our way to addressing the logical problem of the Trinity? And because I think we are, because I don't think it's a logical problem at all, because the only time that logic enters the conversation is if you have some kind of logical or mathematical contradiction. And some people say it's a mathematical contradiction, that it's one God and three gods at the same time, and that's mathematically contradictory. and that's not what the doctrine of the Trinity is all about. So there's no mathematical inconsistency in the doctrine, and I don't think there's any logical inconsistency either. But I just want to just kind of take our temperature here and see whether or not you think we're on the right track and whether we're making progress. And Juan, you
Well,
can.
oh, one. Okay.
Yeah. I think we are going in a good direction as well. We are we are exploring these issues, and I like where this is going.
Okay. And Dale, do you think we're making do you think this has traction as far as addressing any potential logical problems with the Trinity?
I do, because I think the first step is you need to figure out what is the raw data that you're working with. And so if Juan is operating, he's given us in premise format his what he sees as a logical contradiction, right? We have it in this argument premise: Jesus is God, and also Jesus is not God. That's a logical contradiction. So the first step we need to do is, okay, does the raw data does it affirm Jesus is God, and does it affirm Jesus is not God, and all the other premises as well, or not? And what we're trying to decide here is, okay, well, what constitutes the raw data? Do we have to incorporate data from these creeds? And I think you and I are definitely agreeing that we don't have to. I'm not sure. Juan seems a little hesitant on that. Like, do we restrict ourselves to the Bible, or do we have to include stuff from the creeds? And yeah, like what? Let's just put it this way, Juan. Are you, if we do restrict ourselves to the Bible, the biblical data, do you think the logical problem of the Trinity goes away as you stated it from the Stanford Encyclopedia?
Good question.
I think probably. Yeah, I'm not so good at what the Bible says, right? I don't have that in my head. So, I mean, I think probably yes. I think probably the logical point of the Trinity probably comes from the creed, the way the things are worded in the creed, I think.
Yeah.
But here's the problem. What does the Bible say? If you ask an Unitarian, he's gonna go even more extreme version. He's going to say, no, the Bible just says that Jesus is like an image of God, and we can interpret it in this way or that way, and you can interpret the Greek in this way or this other way. So what does the Bible say? It's not even like a clear, like when you say what the Bible says, okay, but if you ask 10 Christians, what does the Bible say? You get 11 responses, right? Sometimes this depends on
What?
how you interpret
I
it,
have
right?
I've debated a couple of Unitarians. Obviously, I mentioned Tuggy. I also debated Andrew Griffin and Carlos. I forget his last name now. Carlos something. But so here's an argument I gave as to what I think the New Testament argues for near Trinity monotheism. So I can walk you through these, see if you would say yes or no to that. So I think premise one, the New Testament scriptures clearly state there is only one true God, Yahweh. Would you agree that the New Testament says
I
that?
think the Old Testament says that. I don't
The
know if
Old
the New
Testament.
Testament says that, but the Old Testament, I think, does say that. It says there is only one God, the Lord, right?
Perfect. Yep. Yep. Yeah, it's grounded in the same Old Testament scriptures. Okay. Premise two: the New Testament scriptures state that God the Father, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit are distinct individuals or persons.
And Dale, can I add something real quick?
Sure.
It's not just the Old Testament that affirms that God is one. The New Testament affirms that as well. If you read the book of James, in James, I believe it's in chapter 2, it says, "You believe God is one." Fantastic.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so
And
there's actually New Testament data for that as well. So, okay, sorry,
yeah,
continue.
and my argument's all based on New Testament scripture. So I was just
Okay.
affirming that it's also in the Old Testament. I
Yeah.
didn't know Juan was
Okay.
Juan,
Great.
just to clarify, Juan, were you trying to say that it's only in the Old Testament, and you're saying the New Testament
No,
doesn't?
I don't know if the New Testament says that or not.
Okay, so it
Okay.
does, yeah, and Phil pointed that out. Okay, and it clearly points that these three individuals are distinct individual persons, right? They stand in I thou relations to each other. They have their own separate wills, minds, and intellects, and stuff like that. Okay, so
Where
it's,
where where does it say that exactly?
so between Jesus and God the Father, for example, the Garden of Gethsemane, not as I will, meaning Jesus has his own will, but as you will, God the Father, kind of thing, right? And then it also ascribes a will to the Holy Spirit in other verses in the New Testament as well. I argue that if you have a mind and your own will, that's sufficient for saying, yeah, you are your own person,
Yes,
ontologically speaking.
yes, that's it is implied, right? It's not say, yeah, I think that's implied, right? From the way
Mhm.
they speak, like they present it as another subject, like the Holy
Yeah.
Spirit, like it's not just another name for God the Father. It's obvious that it's a different entity in a way.
Okay. Okay. So we're all on the same page up to premise. Now we're at premise three, and I say all. This is a general premise. All persons that possess at least one or more of what I call the Yahweh identifying features or properties, are minimally a proper, distinctive, and non-divisible essential part of Yahweh or of God.
Yeah, okay. You just say part, right?
I knew you were gonna I knew you were gonna
Well,
light up.
Well, hang on. I said minimally they are a proper part. So it could be they're not parts, right? So this premise, the way it's stated, it's just saying they're minimally that. They could be more than that. Maybe they're not parts. Maybe the creeds are correct or something like that. But I'm just saying minimally they have to be this non-divisible, distinctive and proper, right? To be consistent with premise two, but they're also a non-divisible essential part of Yahweh, because otherwise they don't identify or demarcate Yahweh, right?
Right, right. So I think, yeah, you have to make sense of verses like when John says, Jesus, my Lord and my God, right? Or when John at the beginning says, the word was with God and the word was God, right? And then the word is Jesus. Like you have to make sense of that. What is the text saying when they say, yeah, John called Jesus God, like explicitly, right? I think the other gospels is not so explicit, but yeah, John is kind of getting very explicit there, right?
Okay, so and then just trying to keep it on track, and I'll try to speed it up. But
Okay.
are you you're citing that verse as a potential
No,
problem or
no,
something? No.
no, no. I mean, I don't get. You're asking me if the Bible says that with you, what you say, right? About
No,
the.
this is
Oh,
not from the Bible. This is just the general premise, right? In order to be a Yahweh identifying property,
oh,
right? A property that demarcates Yahweh, kind of thing.
pro- a
Um,
property that demarcates Yahweh. I mean,
any person that exhibits at least one or more of these Yahweh identifying properties must be minimally a proper, distinctive, and non divisible essential part of God or Yahweh.
any pers- Yahweh making property. What is a Yahweh making property? Is a property that Yahweh has, or is a property that if you have that, that it makes you Yahweh, like numerically,
Yeah, it is a property that only a person identified as Yahweh can have.
right? What does Yahweh mean? Is this a proper name? So Yahweh here refers to a subject. It's a subject. Yahweh is a subject. Or what is Yahweh? What does that word pick up?
It's just anyone who would be identified, who would have what Richard Bauckham calls the divine identity of Yahweh in both the Old and New Testaments.
No, wait, hold on. I ask you, what does the term Yahweh pick out? And you tell me it's anyone who has the identity of Yahweh. You cannot use the word when defining the word, right? I'm asking you, what's the definition of Yahweh? Is that a subject? It's just a proper name, like saying Juan is just referring to the subject, which is God. Or what does Yahweh mean?
Yeah, so Yahweh is it's the unique divine name or identity that is attributed to any being or part of a being that um, basically can be distinguished through like what the properties are. So there's creational monotheism properties, right? So this would be only someone who's identified as Yahweh can create, engage in creation, or the sustaining of creation. Um, Only someone who's identified as Yahweh can rule over creation. Okay, so these are a couple things that are Yahweh identifying properties. Another thing is God, Yahweh is unique in his relationship to Israel throughout salvation history. So only someone identified as Yahweh can save humanity and people from their sins and redeem them.
Okay, but hold on. You say something like you say something weird, like Yahweh identifies the person or a part. You say that it can identify a part of Yahweh, but the name can be a part of Yahweh. But since when it will be easier to use a name to refer to a part of me, like my hand? I cannot say that the name the name Juan can refer to my hand, which is a part of me. That would be weird. The name Juan can only refer to me fully, to me as the subject, as a person or as a being, whatever you want to use the word. The name cannot refer to fully me. The name cannot refer to a part of me.
But that's an assumption, right? So names can refer to persons, right? Because they're subjects in the first
Yes,
place, right? And you said names can refer to beings, right?
beings.
So
Yeah, yeah.
so
A being, a person is a being also, right?
yeah, so what we're going to find out, biblically speaking, the name Yahweh applies to both persons and to the being as a whole, and
Okay.
it's applied in different senses. So when we get to it, basically the answer to your thing, right? Why it's not a logical contradiction is because each of the individual persons, Jesus is Yahweh in the sense of is in the sense of the predicate. So it's basically saying Jesus is Yahweh. That just means Jesus has the property of being divine, kind of thing. Whereas only the Trinity itself, under my model, is Yahweh proper in the technically precise sense. But my argument is based on what the biblical data is, and it's not philosophically precise. So I argue it uses this name Yahweh for each of the three persons and for the Godhead as a whole. But in context, we find out when we put that together, it's because it's using it in different senses.
Yeah.
But,
Okay. Yeah.
but right
Yeah.
now, this premise isn't getting into any of that. It's not caring about how we make sense of it. It's just saying, look, anything that's identified as that has one or more of these properties can be identified with Yahweh, whether it's a person or whether it's the full being or whatever kind of thing, whatever you are.
Yeah. And something else that I think might be helpful would be to say that to say that the persons of the Trinity are parts of God, that can be ambiguous. The term part can mean more than one thing. It could mean a component of something, and I wish I hadn't used the word component because it can be very problematic when I talk like that. That's why I said so to speak. I was trying to be careful, and I was trying to be understandable at the same time, and sometimes that's not very easy to do. But you could a part of something could mean a component in the crude sense, where something does not have this kind of simplicity in its nature and in its ontology. But to say that something is a part of something else can also mean that something shares the same essence of something else. And and so if if we think of it in those terms, and all of these are going to be imperfect terms. Remember that our language is going to be a little bit inadequate. in describing the Trinity. So we're doing the best we can here. But I think if we say that the various persons of the Trinity are a part of God in the sense that they share the divine essence of God, I think that can justify the term. And I think if it can make the term useful. And as long as we make that distinction, I think that it can make it can avoid the confusion of this kind of crude idea of God being made up of separate parts, and so therefore his ontology and his divine aseity and his divine simplicity is somehow threatened by that. I don't think it does, as long as we understand what we mean when we say that Jesus is a part of God. If we can come up with different terminology, then I would be all for it. And if that's what you would prefer one, then I'd be happy to accommodate you. So
Yes. So, yeah, a very good, a very interesting question is how exactly do you define part? Because earlier they'll say that if the parts are non-divisible, then they no longer like count as parts. I don't know. But so I look it up, the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, the page of mereology. It says, broadly speaking, we can use part to indicate any portion of a given entity. But I think the word portion is like a synonym. It doesn't go any further. Like, what is a portion? Well, it's a part. I think there is another definition. A part is an intrinsic, something is a part if it's an intrinsic X is a part of Y if X is an intrinsic element of Y without being fully Y, without being the whole thing. If something like that. I think it's difficult to define the word part because at some point it's like a primitive term, right?
Well, so let me just say on my model. So Phil and I do have differences to offer you here, and this is important because so I'm using part in exactly the normal way that you understand it, Juan. For my model, yes, they're parts. That's exactly correct. Now they're a special type of part. They're indivisible parts, and I think I'm saying that's what I think the people who invented this term partialism as a heresy. I think that's what their problem was. Now, the way they've defined partialism, okay, cool. Yeah. So you can't say God is composed of parts. Like Jesus, I would say Jesus is 1/3 God. That's not a problem for my model. But then you're saying, well, that's the heresy of partialism. Fine, who cares? A bunch of Eastern Orthodox and Catholics are upset with me. Don't really give a and Phil doesn't like that either. Cool, I don't care. I think it's consistent with the Bible. It's an equally probable outcome kind of thing, right? Unless what someone can prove that maybe I'm wrong about the doctrine of simplicity or some other doctrine. But cool. So Jesus is 1/3, but he's 1/3 that can't be taken away. He can't be separated from the Trinity or divided from the Trinity, and neither can God the Father, or neither can the Holy Spirit. And that's all that matters to me, kind of thing, right? So, yeah, if you want to accuse me of partialism, I guess I'll just say cool. But that's not a problem for me. And
guilty as charged.
Yeah, and if I traveled back in time to the guys who invented this thing back in the 4th century or whenever it was the problem, I think it was later than that actually, but I think just from my reading, their main concern was but so that means you can divide them up, like I can rip physical things into parts and stuff like that.
Yeah,
Okay.
and that comes down to a rather pedestrian description that I usually use in trying to help clarify these things, and that is that it's possible to differentiate between two things without separating those two things. And so what happens typically in these discussions, and I'm not saying it's necessarily happening today, but it might be. It's hard to tell. But what often happens is that people will slip back and forth between ontology and personality without realizing it. So when we have objections about the term part, then that objection refers to ontology. But if Jesus is a part of God in the sense that he is one of the persons who is God, then it's not necessarily an issue. It's not necessarily a problem. It's certainly not a logical problem, because part of the logic issue here is that the mathematical objection points to ontology, and it doesn't point to personality. You can have one God and three persons at the same time. That is one God ontologically, three persons in terms of separate identity, but not separate ontology. Separate identity does not equal separate ontology. And that's where I think the fundamental confusion often arises. And but Dale, what you're saying is it just makes me light up like a Christmas tree, because you know that I wrote a book about human tradition. I wrote a
Mhm.
book called Biblical Justification, and it was how man-made tradition corrupts the biblical doctrine of justification. And I don't mean any disrespect, or I'm not trying to insult people from the Orthodox or Catholic traditions, but I simply do not accept that they are divinely inspired, and that we have some kind of obligation to to be faithful to them. They have an obligation to be faithful to the scriptures, and by holding up these man-made traditions, they're actually departing from the scriptures, because the scriptures actually try to avoid that kind of problem instead of encourage it. So and the other thing is that, Dale, you and I kind of have some differences, but I think those differences can sometimes be consist can sometimes consist of terminology, and they can be conceptual differences. And what we're talking about is a model that I think we can understand truly, but can't understand exhaustively. And because we can't understand it exhaustively, our language eventually breaks down. Now, it's not that our language is not effective. It's not that our language is not meaningful. It's just that it's not exhaustive, and that it's not going to cover all of the questions. It's not going to answer all of the questions, and it's not going to make it so that we now understand the Trinity perfectly, because I don't think we do understand the Trinity perfectly, but we can understand it to a certain degree truly. And the other thing that I wanted to mention is that there are specific passages in the New Testament that say that Jesus is God, and say that the Father is God, and say that the Holy Spirit is God. And I sometimes that can be kind of glossed over, because we don't get our idea that Jesus is divine just from the creeds. We get it from Scripture. And if you read the first chapter of the book of John, the Gospel of John, it says, "In the beginning was the Logos, and the Logos was with God, and the Logos was God." And I think that's fascinating. It's fascinating that it says that the Word, the Logos, was with God, and the Logos was God. I think that you find that kind of satisfying. I think I do, And Juan, you got a smile on your
Yeah,
face, and you're
yeah,
nodding.
I think that's hard to understand. Maybe if you think that's like poetry, then it's fine. But if you think that's like literally, it means with God and was God, is like, what is he trying to convey? Is very hard to understand, right?
Well, I think what it's doing, I don't think it's poetry. I think what it's doing, because the Gospels are not books of poetry. That's not the genre of the Gospels. So so we don't look at the Gospels and say, "Boy, that's kind of weird. So let's just move that into the category of poetry." When it says that the Word, the Logos, was with God and was God, I think that's teaching two separate concepts that are unified. When it says that the Logos was with God, I think that is an indication of relationship, and persons are involved in relationships. Only a person can have a relationship in the true relational sense, and so somebody might push back against that, and so I'm not gonna necessarily go down that rabbit hole, but I think what that verse in John is telling us is it's teaching us two things. It's teaching us something about a relationship, and it's teaching us something about ontology, about the essence. So what John 1:1 is saying is that the Logos was in a relationship with God, and the Logos is God, both. So it's giving us a relational concept and an ontological concept. And to me, that is a beautiful clarification and actually indication of the Trinity, because you also see that the Holy Spirit is God. You can read that in the book of Acts, where it says, you lied to the Holy Spirit. And then it says, you not only lied to man, but you lied to God. And so the clear implication is that the Holy Spirit is God. And so the scriptures definitely teach the Trinity, even though they don't have the term. And earlier I said that the scriptures don't have the term heresy, and some people would say, well, it teaches the concept of heresy, even though it doesn't use the term. And if they want to do that, that's okay with me. I don't mind. It's just that we can't identify heresies on the basis of the creeds. But the Trinity is definitely in the Bible. And Juan, if you wanted to embark on a specific study of the New Testament, and even the Old Testament, but especially the New Testament, on the Trinity, I think that would be extremely productive for you. I think it would really kind of solidify your understanding of what the Bible really does teach on the Trinity, whether it teaches the Trinity. And if you come up with some inconsistencies or some problems with that, and you'd like to discuss them, then I'm your man. I would love to discuss things like that. Part of my ministry is to help clarify doctrines and help clarify ideas and concepts for people that are, if they're struggling with them. So I think that's kind of, I hope that all these comments are going to be helpful in kind of navigating these waters. And I wanted to get back to Dale here, and I wanted to say to Dale, I like your model. And earlier, when I said that models can be imperfect and then can be incomplete and sometimes even problematic, I don't really want to imply that it's not a good idea to try to come up with models. Because what's the purpose of our models? The purpose is to try to help us understand is certain biblical doctrines and biblical concepts as clearly as we possibly can. And if the model is going to help you do that, then I fully endorse this whole idea of coming up with a model. I didn't want to try to diminish that in any way. So
Yeah, no problem. And same with analogy. I think there are some good analogies out there for at least for the Trinity monotheism model and stuff like that. So yeah, I guess I think in listening to this, and one, I'll leave it up to you because obviously we're trying to help you out. I think is the format for this show, but there is this word essence that's come up when Phil was talking, and so it may be important to understand like what are we talking about, right? So I think we all agreed. Look, there are two kinds of essences in metaphysics, right? So we each have our own individual or personal essence. This is what makes me Dale. That's my personal essence. I'm Dale. Then there's also this, it's called a kind essence or a kind nature, right? So what the essence for being a kind of thing. There's a human kind of thing. And the essence basically refers to a set, from my understanding, I won't speak for Phil if he's got a difference, but from my understanding, in modern metaphysics, an essence is basically a set of properties, the set of properties that are essential for being a kind of thing. So all the properties that make me a human being, that's the human essence, the human.
Wait, Sorry, I think in modern analytical philosophy, the essence is the properties that make you Del, not a human, Del, like the entity that you are, not the kind of essence.
No,
I don't know. I'm not sure.
no, because there's two types of
Yes,
essence.
yeah,
So that
but
only
but one is modern and the other one is medieval, Thomistic,
no, no, no,
Aristotelian kind. No.
no. Both of these concepts are in modern metaphysics kind of thing, right? So that you have your individual essence, right? That's me, whatever that is, right? That refers to the person. So Jesus has his own individual essence, personal essence. God the Father has his own individual personal essence. Same with the Holy Spirit. I think all three of us are agreed on that much, kind of thing, right? But then it comes to the kind essence, right? The kind nature. So that's the set of essential properties for being a kind of thing. And so in this case, we're talking about the divine essence, right? There are three individual personal essences which have all of the essential properties for being a divine kind of thing. Are we saying that? So I don't know if that's what Phil. It sounded like that's what Phil would say. I with the Trinity monotheism model, if I'm speaking technically, I have to deny that because for me, under Trinity, only the Trinity, it's an essential property for being a divine kind of thing that you're tripersonal. None of the individual persons have the property of tripersonality, for example. So only the soul instantiates that property. And so therefore I would say only the Godhead or the Trinity, Yahweh proper, the soul, has the proper instantiates the divine essence properly. Now the model we still say, well, Jesus had a divine nature and God the Father had the divine nature and stuff like that. What I mean by that is in a secondary sense, basically, that he, insofar as he's participated, he has all of the essential divine personal properties and stuff like that that a divine person must have for being a essential part of a divine being and stuff like that, the divine kind of thing. So I'm using language imprecisely there by saying Jesus has a divine nature. But so long as I explain to you what we mean under the model, that it's not precise, then it's fine. And if you understand, there's only one thing that exemplifies the divine nature proper, and that's that soul, the Trinity itself. Then that's what my model says. Now, Phil might be saying something different. So I'm curious, does he think each of the individual persons has all of the essential properties for being a divine kind of thing? And if so, that may be a difference for us and stuff.
Well, no, I think that all three persons of the Trinity carry all of the attributes of divinity. They all carry the same ontology. And I know this is an extremely simple, and sometimes some people might think it's too simple, but I love C.S. Lewis. He is one of my favorite authors, and he has a knack for making things clear that used to be really muddy for me. and and when I was just out of college, I was a I think it was a Jehovah's Witness who came to my door, and I invited them in, and I'd had some theological training. I had a little bit of theological training at the time, and so so I invited them in, and we had a discussion, and we were talking about the Trinity, and they were telling me that the Trinity was all completely nonsensical. And what the guy kept telling me was, or actually asking me, was, "Phil, are you your father?" And and what he was getting at was that Jesus cannot be God, because if Jesus was God, then Jesus and the Father were the same person. And that's simply logically incoherent, and so I needed to throw the Trinity out the window. And C.S. Lewis came up with this analogy that talked about, I think the name of the analogy, if you wanted to name it, would be begotten versus made. And and when if I had read that analogy from C.S. Lewis before I had this conversation with a Jehovah's Witness, it would have helped me in clarifying this quite a bit, because what C.S. Lewis said was, the son of a dog is what? The son of a dog is a dog. The son of a cat is a cat. The son of a horse is a horse. So when an animal reproduces, what their offspring are the same animal that the parents are. And so this Jehovah Witness guy was saying, Phil, the Son of God cannot be God because you're not your father. And I and what C.S. Lewis helped to clarify is that I may not be my father in terms of I'm not the same person as my father, but I am human, because the son of a human being is a human being. The Son of God is God. The Son of God carries the divine essence, the divine properties. So so I think that can be helpful in kind of disentangling this confusion about person versus essence, person versus ontology. And so when we look at the Bible and it says that Jesus is the Son of God, then we can see two things. We can see, one, that they are two distinct persons, but we also know that they share the same essence because one begot the other. One begat the other. What's the right word? Is it begot or begat? Help me out here. But and
Yeah,
so
yeah.
part of Christian theology is that the Son is begotten of the Father, and that is in the Scriptures. It's not just in the creeds. And so if the Son is begotten, and by the way, the idea is that he is eternally begotten, because Jesus did not have a beginning. Jesus in his human nature had a beginning, but in his divine nature he did not have a beginning. He is co-eternal with the Father, but he is still begotten of the Father because the Scriptures tell us that. And so in order to resolve that problem, you simply say that Jesus was eternally begotten, that he somehow proceeds from the Father. And do I understand that? Do I understand how he can proceed from the Father? No, I don't understand it. But it is a fundamental truth that I think that the Scriptures teach, and I think that it solves certain problems for us. And so I would say that the members of the Trinity are members of the Godhead, and they are distinct persons, and they share the same divine essence with each other. They are co-equal in terms of their divine essence and their divine nature, but they are not the same in terms of their personality. So I don't know if that helps clarify any differences between you and me, Dale, but that's a hopefully that's a little bit of a better description of the model that I have, if you can call it a model. So
Mhm. Yeah, well, I'm interested in what one makes on that front in terms of the understanding of essence and how that relates. Like, yeah, what's your take on that one? Or
Yeah. So for my understanding, yeah, I think that's a very important thing to do, to make, to specify what exactly do we mean by the word essence. And there are different. I have also heard of different definitions. One, this comes from the Aristotelian model, where you have essential properties and accidental properties. And the essential properties is the set of properties that make an entity the entity it is. And without those properties, you will not be that entity. For example, my essential properties will be the ones that make me Juan. Those will be my essential properties. And if I'm, for example, an accidental property will be, for example, if I'm sitting or if I'm standing, that doesn't change me being Juan. That will be an accidental property. That's one sense of essence. And there's another sense of essence that is more like it makes a thing the kind of thing it is. For example, the human essence or the human nature makes us humans. In that sense, it works like the quality of a thing is what accounts for the whatness. So there is different senses, right, of the word essence, and it's important to be exact, to be precise here. I think, and yeah, is that correct there, Dale?
Yeah.
But sitting and standing are not properties; they're modes.
Yeah, okay.
So
Maybe the
I'm
length of my hair is a better example. That's an accidental property. If my hair is longer or shorter a little bit, that's an accidental property.
Yeah. Well,
If my hair is
so
a
in
little bit
terms of
longer,
no, but the length of your hair is not is not one of your properties.
yeah, yes, it
No,
is.
no. One of your properties is that you have hair. The length is the property of your hair, not the property of Juan.
Having a hair of length, this length is also a property of one. I think a property like a feature of a subject. I think. What do you think, Dale? Is the
yeah,
length of my
I
hair a
agree with
property?
yeah, I agree with you that it would be a property of you as well, kind of thing, and it makes sense what Phil's saying that it's a property of your hair as well. There can be layers to it and stuff, but yeah, so I agree with like I mean that's just what I kind of said in terms of the two different kinds, and obviously the kind nature I recognize it goes back to the concept goes back to ancient times. You're right about that, but it's still used in modern stuff, even if it's controversial. I've taken philosophy classes in a modern university where we still discuss this and debate it and stuff. So the I guess with applied to the Trinity. So in terms of contingent versus essential properties or accidental for example, only Jesus, the Son of God, has the property of being incarnate as of 38, as of 6 BC up until the present. He's still incarnate, even up in heaven, kind of thing. So only he has that property. That's a contingent or an accidental property, kind of thing. God the Father doesn't have the property. The Holy Spirit doesn't have that property. But all that we're interested in here with the Trinity is, okay, what are those essential properties for being that divine kind of thing? And I think Phil's saying, yeah, that I agree with Phil that they're all co-equal. They all have the same. I believe they all have the same properties, kind of thing, right? As each of the divine persons have all of the essential divine person making properties. Um, However, none of them technically have instantiate the divine nature with a capital TH. Only the soul instantiates that because, if for no other reason, but for the fact that tri-personality is an essential property for being a divine kind of thing, and none of the individual persons bear that property. So they, technically speaking, they can't be divine in that proper first sense. And that's why William Lane Craig's model says, but it makes sense when the Bible says God, Jesus is God or is divine, it's talking about in this secondary sense. And William Lane Craig uses the analogy of like a cat and its skeleton, kind of like what Phil was just doing with you and your hair, right? Like, okay, so it makes sense to say that the skeleton, the cat skeleton, is feline. It exhibits the feline nature, even though it's not technically exhibiting all of the essential properties of a feline kind of thing. But we still go, oh, that's that skeleton over there. That's a feline skeleton. It's an essential part of the feline kind of thing, and that's the secondary sense that I believe the Bible is using for each of the individual persons, and that's the sense that my model is using. It's not philosophically precise. If you said, well, as a philosopher, does Jesus have the divine nature proper? I would have to say no. None of the persons do, kind of thing, right? But when I'm
Yeah.
speaking not in a philosophically precise manner, or well, put it this way. So in a philosophically precise manner, the argument is there's two senses you can exhibit a divine nature, right? So this is the first proper sense, and then you can be an essential part of the divine nature proper, the divine kind of thing proper, kind of thing. So that's the argument that I make, kind of thing. And yeah, does that help at all? Like, first of all, yeah, let me just ask you: is my model and is Phil's model, is that logically coherent to you, or do you see any logical incoherencies?
Well, I think your model manages to avoid the logical incoherencies, right? Will be
Okay.
at the cost of being very close, really close to a partialist model, right? That's what I said earlier. And I looked it up why partialism is problematic, and
Hmm.
I think it's not just because whether you can divide God from the Son, it's because it you are saying that the Father is not fully divine. That's what you're saying when you're so when you say this of the Father, then it sounds really bad, you know.
Okay, yeah, yeah. Because again, because they have their creeds that that full divine essence has to be in each of the individual things. So that's where you get into these foolishness of Trinity, an infinite regress of trinities within trinities and stuff, right? Because okay, well then God the Father has to be a Trinity in and of himself, and each of those have to be trinities, and all this nonsense with the creeds. But yeah, I will just say guilty is charged. I commit partialism. I say God the Father is only one third of God. Jesus is one third of God. So guilty is charged, but cool. Am I going to be judged for that on Judgment Day just because some human being wrote 600 years? You can't say that. As long as the Bible allows me to, that's all I care about.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily, yeah, I don't align with every aspect of your model, Dale, but the primary objective of this podcast, of this episode, is to establish that the doctrine of the Trinity is not logically incoherent, that it is not illogical to believe in the Trinity. That's really my fundamental purpose. And we might have different models for the Trinity, and they might have implications for partialism and non-partialism, and they may have all sorts of philosophical implications, and they might have philosophical problems. But philosophical problems and contradictions are not the same thing. And so it's fine that we might have different models for the Trinity. What matters is that the doctrine of the Trinity itself, in its bare form, in its essence, haha, see what I did there? In its essence, is not intrinsically incoherent, logically incoherent or illogical. And and so it's fun to explore all these different models, and it's fun to see what their implications are for Christian orthodoxy and whether or not the early church they embrace that kind of a model, and who embraced it and why and what the implications are. All those things are interesting, but they don't necessarily change the fundamental thesis that I want to state today, and that is that the Trinity itself, the doctrine of the Trinity, is not illogical. It is not logically incoherent. And so if there's an atheist out there who wants to use the incoherence of the Trinity as an argument against theism, then that argument is going to fail because they have not established that the doctrine of Trinity is illogical and that it is somehow mathematically and logically incoherent. And so that objection does not actually defeat theism, but I think it's important for us to understand the Trinity because a lot of that has to do with good theology, and good theology is very practical, you know. So, yeah, and it has a lot of implications for our discipleship between Dale and me, and I hope someday it will have implication for your discipleship, Juan. Wink,
And
wink.
I think despite our differences, it sounds to me, if I'm understanding Phil properly, we both agree in terms of how you structured the logical contradiction of the Trinity or the logical problem of the Trinity. Both of us are saying when it comes to the statement God the Father is God, Jesus is God, Holy Spirit is God, which I and Phil, biblically speaking, I affirm those. I will say those. I say those all the time. but we're using that is in the sense of a predication, right? It's ascribing a property, that namely being a divine or having the essential set of divine properties and stuff like that, um, for being a divine person, kind of thing, right? To each of those persons. That's all we're saying. So there is no contradiction because that's a different sense than when we come to God the Father is not God, meaning he's not the Trinity. That's where we're saying using is in the sense of an identity statement. So there's two different senses. Therefore, it doesn't violate the logical law of non-contradiction. And even the Muslim metaphysician, and he's one of the world's experts, Dale Tuggy, they recognize there is no contradiction if you do that. And then from there, it's just a question: well, is that biblical? Is that move biblically consistent? I think all three of us are agreeing on that front, or at least you're saying you don't know, like you can't disprove it's not. But your main thing is, but it contradicts the creeds, and that's where we're basically coming down to, do we have to make that consistent with them or not? I guess, and yeah, I'll just ask you: do you've kind of admitted, as far as you know, that the models of the Trinity Phil and I are giving, and that are consistent with the Bible, they can be logically coherent. But I'm just wondering, of the ones you've heard that are creed consistent, are there any of those models that you think are coherent, or are they all incoherent, in your
Yeah,
opinion?
okay. Yeah, I think there are two main models really. One is relative identity, one of the big models, and the other one is social Trinitarianism, right? And the yeah, I think relative identity is it's very interesting, but it seems to me that at the bottom of it almost seems like it's just word games and yeah, identity paradoxes and puzzles. Like maybe you have heard of this. It's like you have a statue, you have a piece of clay, and you put it into a statue. So you can, but then uh, yeah, you can tell that this, and another day you turn it into another statue, for example. So you can say that this statue of the other day is the same piece of clay, but it's not the same statue, right? In some kind of word game, and they want to say, okay, therefore we can just assert plainly linguistically, okay, Jesus is the same God as the Father, but not the same person, right? Just from this example of the statue, they want to say, okay, then therefore you can do the same with Jesus person and God. That's it. That's basically their entire argument. They have some examples, but I'm not convinced by that, right? But yeah, but that's one option. I mean, if relative identity is true, then this will also be a logical way to solve the Trinity. But I just don't think that it is true,
Yeah,
right?
same, same.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it has been proposed. Some people think it's true, like Van Inwagen and Peter Gitsch and whatever, but
yeah,
not
Van
not many
Inman.
philosophers accepted that. It hasn't been accepted by most logicians that this is a real thing.
A lot of Catholics like it and stuff. Even
Yeah.
I think Josh, what's his name? Josh Sajawad. I don't know how to say it.
Sijuwadi, no, he has a different model.
He has a
Yeah,
different. Okay, I
yeah,
thought.
yeah. Yeah,
Okay,
he
cool.
he rejected that as well, and he has. I want to look into that. I haven't looked into. I want to look into his model because he's been popping a lot of on the YouTube. He has been doing some videos in Spanish Philosophy Academy, and he had a debate with Dan McLennan recently. I haven't watched
Yes,
that
yeah,
yet. I began watching that on the Trinity, but he
yeah.
has a model. Yeah,
I
where
disagree with him, but I like it. I like the way he argues and stuff, and when he does his slides and stuff like that, he has premises and all that stuff, so you can follow along and stuff. So yeah,
yeah,
yeah, that was a good debate.
yeah, he seems like the one analytic philosophy kind of guy, which is easier to follow and to understand according to modern philosophy, because a lot often you get these philosophers like like Chris Tomaszewski, and they're Thomist, and they speak like they want to speak the way that people in the Middle Ages speak, like the way Thomas Aquinas spoke, and some like this scholastic guy. And sometimes, like you don't get what are they even saying. It's like nobody speaks like that anymore. Nobody uses those metaphysics model anymore, right? That's very confusing. So I like the way Sijuwade uh, approaches
Mhm.
this better. So he has a model where he thinks that there is one divinity trope, and it's instantiated in like three different regions, maybe spatial regions, but it's the same object, just instantiated in three different spatial regions, right? And I don't know, it's very
Yeah,
complicated to get. I'm not
yeah,
sure this really solves the problem.
yeah. Fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah, yeah. So it sounds to me then like okay. So the good news is in terms of Phil and our goal, and Phil, I'll let you step in. Obviously, you're the main host here, but it sounds like we've kind of succeeded. If our goal was to see if we could get Juan to say like, well, look, I can't make a claim that there is at least one or more logically coherent version of the Trinity, even with including the creeds. He's conceded at least a couple could be coherent and stuff like that. Like it sounds like yeah, great, we won. Like this is kind of our goal. We've made progress on what we were trying to do. Um, yeah, do you agree, Phil, or are you happy or you're looking
Well,
angry? I mean, I'm scared.
I thought you were no. I'm just tired, and I look angry because I have a shaved head and a beard, and so everybody
Okay,
thinks I look angry all the time. Um,
okay.
somebody called. I think it
Phew.
was Drew Mack from Provisionist Perspective who said that I look like Ming the Merciless, and
Oh
so
yeah.
sometimes I've been tempted to put the little moniker Ming the Merciless under my name here on these podcasts, but I just haven't brought myself to do it. So no, I mean, I feel like we have made progress, but I thought you were asking that question of Juan, because I think we've made progress. In fact, I don't think the Trinity has ever been a logical problem in terms of what the Bible actually teaches, because the Bible doesn't have a complex model of the Trinity. The Bible simply says Jesus is God, the Father is God, and the Holy Spirit is God, and it gives us indications that these are three distinct persons, and that's all I need. I don't need a model to explain all of that. So I simply affirm a very basic, fundamental doctrine of the Trinity because that's what the Bible teaches, and I don't have to have some kind of a complicated systematic in order to hold it. Now, but again, I'm not saying that the models and the systematics are not important, that they don't serve a purpose, but they don't serve the purpose of establishing the fact of the Trinity, and the fact that they are logically coherent and that they can make sense of the Trinity in a way that eliminates contradictions. To me, that's enough. And so my question for Juan is: do you agree that we've made progress? Do you think that we can be confident that the doctrine of the Trinity is not intrinsically illogical?
Yeah, I think we've made some progress, right? Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna go as far as to say, yeah, I don't think there is any problem at all with the doctrine of the
Oh
Trinity,
no,
but we have made some progress.
yeah. Yeah,
Sure.
and I wouldn't ask you to affirm the idea that that there are no problems with the doctrine of the Trinity, because there certainly are what we might call problems with the doctrine of the Trinity, but that's very different from saying that the doctrine is intrinsically illogical or logically incoherent. And the fact that we are wrestling with an extremely difficult concept doesn't mean it's illogical, but it also doesn't mean that we aren't going to that there aren't going to be aspects of it that we don't understand, because I do not understand how God can be one essence and have one divine nature but exist as three individual persons. I don't understand how that can happen. And part of the reason I don't understand that is because I'm not God. You know, I'm a human being. I don't have that tripartite nature. And so I hope that we haven't given you the impression that we think that the Trinity is a problem-free doctrine. I wouldn't wanna say that, and I wouldn't want you to come away from this conversation with that impression. It certainly is problematic, but there are a lot of things that are true, and they're still problematic. You know, I think that the law of gravity is real, but there are aspects of the law of gravity that I don't understand, and I think even scientists a lot of scientists don't understand. Some people would say that we don't understand how gravity works, but that's much different from rejecting gravity and denying that it is actually a law of physics. So, yeah. Does that
All right.
does that
And
help?
Juan, over to you. I want to ask you, like, do you think we've kind of made progress in terms of the purpose of the show? Like, I forget what you said to Goddess Granny when she interviewed you. Did you say argue that it was incoherent at that time? And obviously now
No,
you've changed. Or,
that was very brief. It was just like a few minutes. I just see she said it was the logical problem of the Holy Spirit that she just said it like that. But I clarified it, and I said what you are referring to is called the logical problem of the Trinity, and is
mm,
the statement Jesus is God, the Father is God, the Holy Spirit is God, and yet Jesus is not the Father. So these set of statements is as taken as face value. They are logically inconsistent, right? So we need to
okay.
find a way
And,
to, yeah.
so you never asserted it was like a that you never asserted or affirmed the logical problem. You were just explaining what it was. I guess is what happened.
Yeah. Yeah, but
Okay.
I
Well,
want to get into that. Yeah, I want to
yeah,
make it one of my. I'm going to start making content on that later. Not yet. I'm still researching, right? But I do
yeah.
want to get into that topic.
Well, what struck me was that in your conversation with Godless Granny, I think that she is convinced that the Trinity is logically incoherent. Now, if I'm wrong about that, then I would owe her an apology, but I'm pretty sure that she thinks that the Trinity is illogical. And she also believes that God cannot exist, that it's not logically possible for God to exist. And she has several reasons why she believes that, and one of them is that if God exists and that he would create human beings that he knew would would not believe in him, or who would commit moral infractions and that kind of thing, and that therefore that is responsible for all of the moral infractions that human beings commit just because he created them. And and she had a conversation with Eric Hernandez a few months ago, and I don't think it was much longer than that. And Eric tried to explain to her that the fact that God caused the existence of a human being does not mean that he caused the existence of their sin or their moral infractions. And it doesn't mean that he caused the existence of their choices. And and she just that just did not register with her. And she still maintains that if God exists, then he is the cause of all of our choices, and therefore that's incoherent, because if he's a good God, he wouldn't cause us to do bad things. and and Eric Hernandez, I think he was frustrated because he clearly refuted that idea, and she just didn't get it. So but what I got from your conversation was that she thought that the Trinity was illogical, and I think that's what she thinks. And and what I noticed was that you didn't push back on that. When she said that the Trinity was illogical or something like that, and I'd have to go back to the transcript, but your response to that was to bring up the fact that there is an argument out there about the logical impossibility, or the logical contradiction, or the logical incoherence of the Trinity. And I'm not sure that you were telling her, yeah, Godless Granny, I agree that the Trinity is illogical. I don't think you were saying that. but you didn't actually correct her misconception, and so it made me wonder where you stand on this issue. Made me wonder whether or not you really thought that the Trinity was illogical, and so I thought it would be worth the discussion because there are a lot of people that struggle with this. There are atheists that struggle with it, and there are Christians that struggle with it. And so it's worth doing a show like this because it helps clarify a lot of these ideas and it helps clear up misunderstandings. And that's what a lot of what Dale and I try to do in all of our work is we try to clear up misunderstandings and try to correct misconceptions. And if the Trinity is a barrier to belief for an atheist, then it is well worth my time to address the issue because part of my ministry and part of my apologetic is to remove the barriers to belief for people who don't believe. And if the Trinity is a stumbling block for for somebody to believe in the God of the Bible, then I have a high degree of motivation to remove that stumbling block as much as I can. And Juan, I want to remove all the stumbling blocks for you becoming a Christian. So,
Great. Yeah, that's cool. Thanks.
well, so what I wanted to do was I'd like to pivot if it's okay with you guys because there were a few other things that you discussed with Godless Granny, Juan, and I wanted to address a couple of those minor points as well. They're kind of they're not as big as the Trinity issue, but they're still big issues, and so I wanted to cover a few of them because one of the things that you talked about was uh, that that uh, that God created the laws of the laws of logic. That there are some Christians who actually think that God created the laws of logic, and I believe that Kelly brought that up. And and I don't know if she thinks that that's a defeater for Christianity or not, that some Christians believe that God created the laws of logic, but that's not what I believe, and I don't think that's actually a coherent theological principle that God created the laws of logic. I think the laws of logic are grounded in his nature. And if that's the case, then they are part of his ontology and that they do rule over the truth values of everything in creation. And if he created the laws of logic, then they would be arbitrary and they wouldn't be able to rule over creation, or it seems it's kind of hard to believe that they could. So, and Dale, I'd like you to chime in on that as well. So,
Right. Oh, okay. I thought Juan
did you
was.
go to sleep?
No, no, I heard about that. Yeah. So yeah, I did hear. I was re-listening to the first part where you were talking about that kind of thing. I got up to the first 20 minutes or something like that. So, um, yeah. So I agree. It sounds to me like Juan agrees with us that from issues like the multiple realization issue and stuff like that, that the laws of nature are, for lack of a better word, transcendent, right? That they're not grounded in reality itself. I think Juan was saying, no, that's ridiculous. He doesn't believe that typical route of the atheist. At the same time, he's a nominalist, so I'm not sure how that kind of reconciles because he's not a Platonist. But yeah, so I would just kind of agree with you, Phil, that the laws of logic are grounded in God, something intrinsic to God. It's not his mind necessarily, although the propositions are there in his mind as thoughts, but it's his logical nature, right? It's his essentially logical nature that grounds what we call the laws of logic and stuff, right? And it's his capability. It's impossible. God lacks the power to create a square circle or a logically contradictory thing, not because there's some law external to him saying you can't do that, God, you're not allowed to. No, it's because he can't do the illogical. He is a logical, essentially logical being. He just can't make a square circle. That's logically impossible, and that's what grounds the God's capabilities and causal capacities and stuff like that are what grounds what we call the laws of logic. What is logically possible versus not? And his knowledge of his capabilities in that front is what grounds the propositions corresponding to the logical law of non-contradiction, the law of excluded middle, the law of identity, stuff like that. So yeah, it's grounded in God, and then his knowledge of it is what grounds the propositions that correspond to those logical nature.
Yeah, and there was a related idea that I think that you guys talked about, and I think that this came from Kelly. And by the way, I should have reviewed the transcript of that discussion before today, because I'm relying on my memory here. So I took some notes about it, and I'm just going off my notes. But I think that it was Kelly who said, if God cannot violate the laws of logic, then they are prior to him ontologically, that they are external
I
to
think
him.
I say that.
You said that? Okay.
I think I came up. I brought that up. Yeah.
Okay. Well, so does this scratch where you itch also? Because if we say that the God cannot violate the laws of logic, that can mean two different things. It can mean that they are exterior to him, or that they are prior to him, or it could mean that they are grounded in him. And if they are grounded in him, we can still say he cannot violate the laws of logic. And the reason we can say that is because he cannot violate his own nature, because that's it would be logically incoherent to violate one's own nature. So
But but you realize you're saying, okay, why cannot he violate his own nature? You are saying because it will be logically incoherent to violate his own nature. So you're saying that what's logically incoherent is precisely like what rules, what determines whether God can violate his own nature or not, right? You know what I mean? You're like, why cannot?
but
Yeah,
but the logical principle that he cannot violate his own nature can also be grounded in his own nature. There's no contradiction there.
doesn't that give you like an infinite regress or some kind? Like, why can't
No.
God make a square circle? Because it's a logical contradiction, right?
Hmm.
Okay, it will imply he will violate his own nature, right? Okay, why cannot he violate his own nature? Because it's a logical impossibility. Again, you're just giving the same response, right? So you're just saying
Well,
there is a rule that
it
rules
it,
what
it,
God can do.
it is a tautology. It's definitely a tautology, but a tautology is not necessarily a contradiction, because at some point you get down to what will eventually become a tautology. And the fact that it's logically incoherent for God to violate his own nature, that can still be a logical principle that is grounded in his nature. So you could say, well, that's circular. And I agree, it is circular because it is a tautology. We've come to a singularity where the laws of logic are grounded in God's nature. He will not violate them because that would violate his nature. And and that is all perfectly logically coherent. There's no logical contradiction there. So not all tautologies are necessarily fallacies. Some tautologies are actually not fallacies, and this is one
Yeah,
of
I
them.
mean, yeah. Okay, tautologies are not necessarily false. In fact, it's the opposite, but they're often seen as meaningless in philosophy. Like that's problematical. Tautologies are problematic in also. I mean, you cannot say that's a tautology, but that's no problem. Often when people say that's a tautology, it's like they're like something bad, you know. But look, I mean,
No,
think.
I'm not saying that it's not a problem because it's a tautology. I'm saying that it's not a problem because it's not. I'm saying that it's not a problem because it's a tautology.
Okay,
Wait a minute. I confused myself. I'm not saying that it's not a problem because it's a tautology. I'm saying that not all tautologies are necessarily problematic. That's better. Sorry
yeah,
about that.
okay. I do think you still get the problem of the infinite regress. Look, why cannot God make a square circle, right? Because because it violates the laws of logic, which are grounded on his nature. Okay, that's the question. why can he now? Okay, now the question: why cannot he violate his nature? Okay, this violates a law that says that uh, he cannot violate his nature, right? But what is that law grounded on? You're going to say again on his nature, but then you can repeat the questions. It seems like you could repeat the question, because that's grounded in his nature again, like the first thing. You know what I mean? It seems like,
But
yeah.
there's no need for the circularity. That's the point. It just ends at his nature, right? He can't do it because he can't do it.
Oh,
But,
yeah.
but I know that's not what Phil was saying, but I'm just saying that's what the proper answer is
Okay,
when it's
okay,
grounded in his nature. But
okay,
here's what I wanted to get from
okay.
you,
Okay,
Juan.
but that's hold on, just a second. But that's brute. He can't do it because he can't do it. That's saying that's the end. That's saying that's the same as saying that's just brute, right? To me, that sounds like just bruteness.
No, that's just the end of the explanation kind of thing. Because out of necessity, God's nature is what it is out of logical necessity kind of thing, right? He's necessarily logical by nature, by essence kind of thing, and that's the terminus of the explanation. But what I wanted to get to you on is your view is actually the more problematic view, right? If we have this, oh God, let's pretend there's a God and there's this external thing, because you okay, so you admit that the logical law of non-contradiction is a thing that exists out
No,
somewhere,
I'm a
right?
nominalist. I'm a nominalist. I don't think propositions exist.
Okay, so what, it's only grounded in concrete particulars. But then, so what did you mean when you denied that? Because you explicitly said, I don't believe that like other atheists do. It's not grounded in
Oh, yeah,
concrete particulars in reality
yeah,
because
yeah,
it's
yeah.
transcendent. Yeah.
Yes, some atheists think that that's just okay because reality is in this particular way. Then it is true that A cannot be not A. And I think that's very absurd because it implies that if reality had been different, like if the world had been different, then
Mhm.
maybe this would be different. Then maybe contradictions could be true or a square circle could be possible. And I think that's absurd. It's obvious that there is no possible way reality could be that makes it true that a circle can be a square. And I think it's also obvious to say that just God cannot possibly make a square circle because the moment it's a square that it cannot be a circle, right? It's just so obvious in a way, it's just so primitive, just obvious that not
It's
even God can do it. And that doesn't mean God is weak or whatever, or that this is like about, but it's just obvious in a way, right?
it's called self-evidence, right? That it's, you're saying it's self-evident. It's not brute, it's self-evident kind of thing, right? But
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah,
but that means you're
there's a big difference between something being tautologous and being self-evident and being brute, because brute has a connotation that is not necessarily present in the idea of a tautology or the idea of a self-evident proposition or self-evident idea. So no, we're really not saying that it's brute. And and by the way, I just want to take a quick detour here and say and point out that a lot of atheists say that they can't explain the universe, and they can't, they have a hard time coping with the idea that the universe cannot be eternal, or that the universe had to have a beginning, whether it did or whether it didn't. The what they appeal to, obviously, or and often, is that the existence of the universe is just a brute fact, and that it's just something that doesn't need an explanation. And the way that I reply to that is, well, okay, so now you believe in God now, right? Because what if I said God is just a brute fact? He doesn't, God doesn't need an explanation. And so as soon as I say that, then suddenly thousands of atheists are going to start coming to the altars. Oh, and
Yeah.
so this
yeah,
this idea of the brute fact, the brute fact argument from some atheists, not necessarily from you, Juan, but from some atheists, it just that doesn't fly. But anyway,
right.
that was a detour. I didn't mean, I don't going to go off on that bunny trail too much, but I think it's
Well,
amusing. So
I do want to. I am trying to go somewhere on the ontological point with Juan. I want him to follow the implications of his own view here. Right. So essentially you're not it's you are grounding this in something transcendent from physical concrete things. You're not a nominalist then. You are grounding the laws of logic in something beyond, right? Because they apply to hypothetical logically possible worlds. Unless
Yeah.
so what okay, let me just ask this first of all. What is it grounded in? What is it that
Okay.
transcends all logically possible worlds and that grounds the logical law of non-contradiction,
Okay. Here is
exclusivity?
my view on it, and
Okay.
not many people don't agree with that. I think the law is true analytically. I think it's grounded in the definition of the word "not." That's what I think, my opinion. But almost nobody agrees with that.
But where did
I think
Grounded
where
in
did
the
the
word.
definition come from?
the definition don't need grounding. Definition don't need justification.
So it's a brute fact.
So definition is a definition. Like
I know,
It's grounded in the
but
word not.
only a mind can create a definition. A definition doesn't come out of a vacuum. Where does the definition come from?
yeah, a mind creates a definition, but doesn't make like yeah, you're right. But when I define a house, like one thing is the definition of the house, and another thing is the house itself, right? So one thing is the fact that I defining the word not, and the other thing is like the abstraction that is the negation relation, what the thing in itself, right?
So the word not
Mhm.
is what grounds the laws of
Yeah,
logic, you're saying?
yeah, yeah,
Okay, so that can't be. In order to stand in a grounding relation, you have to be a thing, right? And there are only three types of things. Words are not things. Um, so there are substances, there are property things, which are basically all physical objects, I argue, are property things. None of them are substances in their own right. And then there are heaps, like a heap of salt. These are the only things that which exist. These are the only things that are property bearers, which could therefore bring about stand in a grounding relation to things like the laws of logic. The word not can't ground anything. Words don't ground anything.
okay. In this context, what I understand from the word grounding, it means to make it true. Like to ground something is to make it the case that this is true. For example, what grounds the fact that the number three is larger than the number two? No, I don't think the numbers and neither the three nor the two are a concrete thing, are concrete substances. Yet there is something that has to be account for the fact that three is larger than two. There is something that makes that true, something that grounds that. What
Right.
Yeah,
is
and
the?
that's a stipulative definition.
I mean, that's
And is if we all accept the stipulative definition, then we can say that that three is greater than two. Not
yeah.
all
I think
definitions not all
yeah, I think
definitions are lexical. Some of them are stipulative.
yeah.
Stipulative.
I
You know.
actually think that the definition of three is actually the successor of two, so it has to be larger than two. So I do think that the definition kind of grounds. I mean, in a way, I think the definition of two is one plus one, for example. I think that I would say that that's the definition of the two, for example.
So
Somebody would,
Oh,
yeah.
okay. Well, what we're talking about is whether the laws of logic are grounded in the mind of God or the nature of God, or whether or not they are prior to God. And so we're getting into the weeds about definitions and
well, because
ontologies, and you know.
yeah, because I want to understand one's view because I think it doesn't make sense. Like the problems he's describing to us actually apply to his view. So that's why I was just trying to like understand where he's coming from. But yeah, if it's getting too in the weeds, I'll just say this then quickly, and then we can move on. Okay, so if what you're saying is great, but what is truth? The correspondence model of truth, which I think all of us would agree to, the vast majority of philosophers go for that. But basically, you have a truth bearer, right? That's the thing like a proposition, which makes a statement, something that can be either true or false, and that corresponds to a truth maker. You've said yourself, so I think I'm a truth maker maximalist, right? So there again, you need a thing that exists in reality to make the proposition true. So once again, in order to ground, even where with your definition of grounding of making it true, requires a thing to exist in reality to make that proposition true.
Yeah.
So you still have that problem, but
Okay.
but yeah. So my issue here to skip ahead and get out of the weeds for Phil here. Great. So let's okay, so you have somehow the logical law of non-contradiction exists independently of God. I don't understand how that it doesn't sound plausible, but you're saying, okay, well, God can't make a square circle. Why? Because the logical law of non-contradiction will spank him if he does. So okay, I'm obeying the law and I'm not doing that. But then when I say, well, okay, well, how does the does the logical law of non-contradiction, why does it operate the way it does? Why can't it just make square circles come true and let people make square circles and stuff? What is restricting it? And I think you're gonna come down to the same answer we're doing. You're just saying, well, it just is what it is. It's self-evident that it's this is what it is. This is true. It can't be opposite. And that's what we're saying with respect to God. And with God, at least we've got a thing that exists to ground this. You've got the logical law of non contradiction just existing, which doesn't make sense if it's not grounded in a thing. But that was my point.
I don't think it exists, right? Propositions do not exist because I'm a nominalist. I think it is true, but it doesn't exist, right? But let me ask you this. Okay, what grounds the fact that 3 is larger than 2? Because none of these are concrete things, neither the 3 nor the 2. So what is are you going to say that numbers are concepts in God's mind? Is that how you're going to ground it? Is that your response to that?
We don't have to address the question of what grounds whether 3 is greater than 2. What we're trying to do is we're trying to establish that the laws of logic are not prior to God, and that they don't have to be prior to God for them to be grounded in God. And so what I'm addressing is the specific point that if God cannot violate the laws of logic, they are prior to him. And we don't need to talk about definitions and grounding for mathematical values and things like that. We don't need to pursue that in order to answer the question, are the laws of logic prior to God, and must they be prior to God in order for him to not be able to violate them? So I'm just saying that it doesn't follow that if God cannot violate the laws of logic, that they must be prior to him. It just simply doesn't follow. There's no argument and there's no logical reason why we should accept that proposition.
My point is that like it doesn't make sense to speak of the laws of logic independently of God in any way. There's no truth maker. With us, the truth maker is God's nature. That's what makes what we call the logical law of non-contradiction true, kind of thing, right? Because it corresponds to God's nature, and God is a thing that exists. Where what Juan's saying, he's got no thing that makes the logical law of non-contradiction true. There's nothing that correspond. There's no reality to correspond, kind of thing, because he says it's independent of God and it's independent of all reality. So what the heck makes it true? Why can't God make a square circle?
Well, the more fundamental question is, why is it logically impossible or logically incoherent to make a square circle on its face?
Isn't it obvious that the moment you take a square, you try to make it to a circle, well, it stops being a square. When you think about it, isn't like really obvious that it just cannot be the case. It's not possible, and that it's not logically possible. I'm being redundant,
right. But I agree that it's not logically possible. I mean, we're in agreement there. What we're talking about is, why is it logically impossible? And so that takes us to the question of the grounds of the laws of logic. Why do the laws of logic, why are they binding on reality? And when Kelly said that if God cannot violate the laws of logic, then they must be prior to him, or if you said that, I don't remember which was the case, but the fact that God cannot violate the laws of logic does not mean that they are prior to him ontologically. That's the only point that I'm interested in here. And part of that is to say that there needs to be an argument that establishes the conclusion that if God cannot violate the laws of logic, they must be prior to him. Where is the argument that establishes that conclusion as a true conclusion? And I've never seen an argument about it. And if someone wants to propose one, I'd be happy to listen to it. But so far, it doesn't follow logically. It's not logically necessary that the laws of logic must be prior to God in order for him to be unable to violate them. It's not logically necessary. I don't hear a logical argument that establishes that. And so I don't see any basis for making this claim and for believing that this thesis is true. And so I would simply ask the question and offer and make an offer. Can somebody demonstrate that this proposition is true? Because so far it hasn't been demonstrated, and it doesn't follow logically from, from itself. It can't follow logically from itself. So where is it? How does it follow that that's true? And that's the answer that I'm not hearing. So does that make sense? Am I tracking here?
Yeah. I mean, it just seems intuitive, right? That if God has like this rule, like if it's impossible for God, right, to do something, it's like even for God, it's impossible to make something that is logically impossible. Then it seems intuitive that, in a sense, to say, well, okay, then that rules over God, and if it rules over God, then how could it be the case that God created that God cannot create some rule and then have
Okay.
this rule over
Okay,
him? That's
let
not
me let me
true.
just let me just stop you right there real quick. I don't want to be rude or anything, but you just introduced something. You just introduced a new element into the conversation that wasn't there before, and that's not there intrinsically. You said rules over God. So that's a question begging epithet. So the fact that something can determine what God can and cannot do logically doesn't mean that something rules over God. God can be ruled by an internal principle that is grounded in himself. And then he can be consistent with it. There's no logical contradiction with that. And there's nothing in that that necessitates that there's something must be ruling over him. Because somebody can be ruled by something outside of them, and somebody can be ruled by something that is internal to them. It happens all the time. I can be ruled by my own moral principles. And if I made up
That's what
those moral principles, I can decide to be ruled by those moral principles because I made them up. Now, I don't believe that we make up our own moral principles, but if we did make up our own principles and we decided that we were going to be consistent with those moral principles, then nothing is ruling over us from the outside. So how does that land with you, Juan?
Yeah. Yeah. I get you could be ruled by something internal, right? I mean, the notion is a bit strange. I don't think you're like completely ruled by your moral principles in such a strong way that you're literally incapable of going against them. Like if you wanted to,
Yeah.
I'm not. I mean, like you would want not, but you're not. You still have like the ability.
Yeah,
There's
that
one
that
thing is
that
like the ability.
that's an imperfect analogy,
Yeah,
so, don't put too much stock in it. We're
yeah,
talking about the mind and nature of God here, and so he's not a contingent being. So there may be problems with that analogy because I'm contingent, and, I don't have a problem with that. I'm not gonna I'm not gonna die on that hill, but
yeah.
I think you're tracking with me, that the fact that something rules God's how God does things doesn't mean that what is ruling how he does things has to be external to him. You can be ruled by something that is intrinsic to you, internal to you. And you actually alluded to that just a minute ago. So So I so here's the question: did we make progress with this question as well?
Yeah, maybe. Sure,
Yeah.
sure.
Okay.
Can
Well,
I just ask then, because that's exactly the answer I gave, even on our ontological argument. But like, you didn't understand it then, so like, I'm just kind of curious. Did you hear me saying something different than that? Like, I was always saying, yeah, God is he's logically and morally fully determined by his own nature and stuff like that. Did you hear me saying something different? I'm just curious why it didn't click when I said it.
are you
You mean
asking that?
like,
Are
I'm
you asking
asking
me
one.
or Juan?
One.
Okay.
yeah,
I'm just curious, kind of thing, because we've had a couple conversations where I've said precisely that, but was it just the way he said it, like he's ruled from within? Is that like what was it
yeah,
that caused the click? Okay, the
yeah,
rule
yeah, yeah.
as
Maybe
opposed to
you say
determined. Okay,
yes. Yeah, yeah.
okay,
Yeah, I think you should rethink that, and think about it and ponder it. And if you have any thoughts about it, then circle around and send me an email. We can talk about it again if you want to. But
Sure.
I think that's an option that you can consider. And I don't think that it's necessarily that strong an objection to theism, that if God uh, cannot violate the laws of logic, that they must be prior to him. I don't think that's necessarily true. But I also wanted to cover the rock so big that God can't lift it problem, and and this is something that I have dealt with before, and and I'm going to be real honest here. I'm going to be brutally honest. I'm surprised that anybody even thinks that this is a coherent objection. I'm surprised that anybody would even bring this up. And the reason is that, think about it. What does it mean to lift a rock? It, when you talk about lifting something heavy, you're talking about overcoming gravity, right? Okay. So you have a rock that's really big. And what does it mean to lift that rock? It means that you have to overcome the gravity of another body in order to lift it. Because if there's no other body involved that has some kind of gravitational pull on that rock, then the whole concept of lifting that rock becomes meaningless, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
so can God create a rock that is the size of the Rock of Gibraltar, and can he lift that rock off of a gravitational body like the Earth? Can he overcome the law of gravity and lift that rock off of the Earth? And the obvious answer would be yes. Of course, he can. He can do that. All right. So now we need to expand the size of the rock. We need to make a bigger rock. Now let's say that we make the rock 1,000 times the size and mass and weight of the Rock of Gibraltar.
yeah.
Okay.
Let's say
Is it
the rock. Let's make the rock so heavy that he cannot lift it. Not so
so heavy?
big, so heavy.
Well,
Just but
okay.
not
Yeah.
necessarily big. Just the density. He can
I
just
mean, I
increase the
mean, I
density.
mean heavy. Yeah, heavy is what I'm talking about. Yeah, I'm just using the word big, as an informal term. Okay, so let's say heavy. Let's say that now we've got a rock that is 1,000 times heavier than the Rock of Gibraltar. All right. Now, as soon as that happens, what happens to that rock? What happens to the properties of that rock? It's going to begin to have its own gravitational force, because gravity is a function of mass. So now this rock that's 1,000 times heavier and has 1,000 times more mass, if you don't, if you will, if you'll permit that, that has its own gravitational force. And what does it mean to lift that rock from the earth? Now the equation changes, doesn't it? Is God able to overcome the gravitational force of the earth in order to lift that new rock away from the earth and overcome its gravitational force. Can God do that? Yeah. So now we have to make the rock heavier and heavier and heavier. And so are we ever going to get to the point where a rock is going to have so much mass and so much heaviness that it is impossible for God to actually lift that rock? Well, what does the word lift actually mean? At a certain point, as you expand the heaviness of that rock indefinitely, you're going to get to the point where lifting it doesn't even mean anything anymore, because eventually the rock is going to have greater mass than the earth, and now we're talking about whether or not the earth can be lifted off of that rock. And so this entire idea of, can God create a rock heavy enough that even he can't lift it, is absolutely absurd. It is absurd. And so I would encourage anybody that ever thinks that that is some kind of meaningful objection to theism and to God's omnipotence. I would seriously encourage them to abandon this argument and this idea, and this analogy, because it is just absolutely logically absurd. and and I don't think anybody should proudly be able to, should proudly wield this as some kind of an objection to God's omniscience or omnipotence. So you can tell me what you think about that.
Yeah, yeah. One could just reformulate the analogy. One could say, can he make two rocks so heavy that they become impossible to lift from each other, to separate? Sorry, the word lift is wrong. To separate from each other, because they are exerting such a strong gravitational pull towards each other that you cannot separate them. That will be a way to reward the thing, as to not include lift. But I think an even better analogy, for example, would be, okay, can God make an object in such a way that it is an indestructible object, and he's going to make it in such a way that I'm going to cast a spell of indestructibility so strong that not even I will be able to destroy it afterwards, even if I wanted to. Like, I'm going to make this object so powerful, so impressive, so indestructible that even if I wanted to destroy it later, I will not be able to do that. Can he
Okay,
God do that? Such an
okay,
object.
so Juan, tell me what you're doing here.
I'm trying to reformulate the paradox. I don't think
Okay,
this argument
but
works.
when you come up with this concept of something that is indestructible,
Right.
what are you doing? What are you
What do you mean
doing
by
what are you doing to the nature and attributes of that object?
I'm stipulating them?
Okay? And are you stipulating something that is logically coherent? Because you're
Probably not.
talking. Okay, so the idea that God can make an indestructible object is logically incoherent.
Yeah, I agree. No, I agree. This
Okay.
paradox is not
And
doesn't
and
work.
and,
I
and
don't think this is
so
a problem. Yeah.
and so as soon as you say, can God make an object indestructible, you're just saying the same thing that we've said about a whole lot of other things. Can God do something that is logically impossible? And it's logically impossible for an omnipotent being to create an indestructible object. And so it's not in a different class from any other of these objections about God's omnipotence and about whether or not God is able to do something that is logically incoherent or logically impossible. We can come up with tons of examples of that, and the indestructible object is just another example of the rock so heavy that God can't lift it. These are all logically incoherent propositions and logically incoherent offerings. None of them actually bruise the omnipotence of God. None of them do. And they don't bruise the coherence of God as in his ontology. His ontology remains intact because all of these objections are logically meaningless. You have to come up with a logically meaningful objection to God's omnipotence in order to bruise that omnipotence and somehow show that it's incoherent and that it's logically impossible for such a being to exist. That's where my trajectory takes all this stuff.
Yeah. No, that's nice. That's fine. I don't
Make
think that.
sense?
Yeah, I don't think the objection were. I mean, you have to define omnipotence like correctly, right? You have to say omnipotence means that you can do everything that is logically possible, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was this something Juan mentioned or Godless Granny brought
No,
up
I
on
didn't
the
mention that.
program?
Somebody else did. I
Oh,
don't
was
know.
No,
it?
Godless
Just curious.
Granny did. She did. Kelly did.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, let me just touch on a couple of other things because we're getting to the 2.5 hour mark here, and this always goes so
And
fast, especially when I'm talking to Juan because, like, Juan,
did you
you're just you're an ideal conversation partner, and
and Phil just reminders, well, if you want to, there are audience questions or whatever,
yep,
but it's up
I
to you.
realize that, and I've been watching for those, and and I'm being a little selective just for the purpose of time, but let, let me get through just a couple more of these, and then we can just kind of I'll look through the audience questions and see if there's some that would be productive for us to address. Um, I think there was some discussion about the the noetic conditions of naturalism with your conversation with Kelly. And at some point, I think it was Kelly that said, "I feel pain, and so I can know that I'm in pain because I feel pain." And that somehow this is supposed to work against this argument that under naturalism, knowledge and rationality is impossible. Because that was one of the things that I brought up with her when I've been on her show a couple times. I don't remember how many times, maybe only
Yeah.
once, and but we talked about this, and my impression, and again, if I've made a mistake here, then I owe her an apology and anybody an apology. So but I think this is an accurate representation of something that I think that she said. She said that we can have knowledge under naturalism because I can know that I feel pain. So period. That settles the matter. I have knowledge that I'm in pain because I feel pain. And and what she doesn't understand is that if naturalism is true, natural law, the laws of physics and chemistry, they determine everything that you believe. All of our beliefs are the product of natural law. And so if that's true, then your belief that you feel pain has been determined by the laws of physics and chemistry. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have some kind of a neurological problem with your body. You could be completely healthy and you might have no neurological receptors firing at all in your body. But the laws of physics and chemistry are causing and determining your brain to believe that you have a sensation of pain. So that sensation of pain is a derivative of the laws of physics and chemistry, not necessarily derivative of some kind of neural synaptic process that's going on in your body. Under naturalism, we don't even know if we have physical bodies because the belief that we do is caused by the laws of nature. And the laws of nature deceive us. And so therefore, the idea that I feel pain is not a defeater to the impossibility of logic under naturalism. So tell me how that lands with you, Juan.
Yeah, that's called direct acquaintance. There is
Right.
certain kind of knowledge that are not inference based. We don't need to make any inference. Uh, I feel this, I feel pain, therefore I'm in pain. No, you just feel it directly, right? And no, I think you say something like maybe we get a sensation of pain, but we don't feel pain. I mean, but a sensation of pain is pain, right? There is no difference between like a sensation of pain and pain. I'm not sure what you're getting at. Or you also say maybe our physical bodies don't even exist. Like, yeah, but whatever, even if it's mental, even if my hand is not really there, I will still feel pain. I still know that I'm in pain if I feel pain in my hand, right? If I even if my hand is not real, I will know that somehow in my mind I have this sensation, right? So I do think that there is some knowledge that is like direct, you get direct
Okay.
acquaintance with that.
But where does the belief that you have a hand come from? Where does the belief that you can have direct acquaintance come from?
It comes from feeling, from experiencing being directly acquainted with
Okay, no,
something,
no,
like
that's
with
circular.
pain.
You're assuming that your hand exists. You're assuming that you know that you have a hand. You're assuming that you know you have a body. You're assuming
No.
that you know you are capable of feeling pain. You're assuming that the idea of direct acquaintance is true. Where do all those assumptions come from? What is the basis for all those assumptions under naturalism?
Right.
Because under naturalism, the laws of physics and chemistry are causing you to believe, are creating a brain state in your brain, if naturalism is true, that you have a hand, that the idea of direct acquaintance is true, that you're in pain. All these things are being
No,
determined by natural law.
yeah. But the last one that I'm in pain, that cannot possibly be false. It's impossible. I cannot be. This is what I'm
I,
getting at. The important
I'm
point is
not I'm not talking about whether or not it's possible for it to be false. I'm talking about
yeah,
whether it's possible for you to know it. Those are two different things.
yeah, that's right. I cannot be wrong or deceived about the fact whether I'm feeling pain or not. That's impossible. I cannot be wrong about that. That's the
Sure you
point.
can. Sure you can.
No, that's how. Is this not possible? It's impossible.
There are people who have hallucinated that they are in pain. There are certain mental conditions where people believe they are in pain, but there is no neural process going on whatsoever that defines what pain is. They
Really?
believe they are in pain.
Okay, really? I didn't know that. No, I don't. I
Well,
never heard of that. Maybe some people are crazy. I don't know that. No, I
well,
don't know about that, but I don't think that's. Maybe they felt pain, like phantom pain, but it wasn't real, right? Maybe they felt pain. No?
no, there are people in mental institutions who will say, "I'm in agony."
Okay.
And they say, my hand hurts, my foot
Okay.
hurts, my leg hurts, my head hurts. I'm gonna
Really?
die here. I'm in so much pain. Give me some pain medication.
Okay.
And they're not in
Okay.
pain. There is simply no neurological condition whatsoever detectable in their physiology that they are actually experiencing pain. It's all in their head. It's all in their mind. And so this, and not only that, but the belief, even the belief that there is such a thing as mental awareness is also determined by natural law, if naturalism is true. All of these
Okay.
things, and so they cannot be obvious. Nothing can be obvious if naturalism is true, because you have to infer that these things are obvious, and direct acquaintance does not get around that problem, because direct acquaintance is simply a belief that you think that you are directly acquainted with something, when your belief that you're directly acquainted with something is determined by the laws of physics and chemistry. Something is making your brain believe in that there's such a thing as direct acquaintance.
Right.
So none of these
Okay.
things are reliable because natural law deceives people every day.
Yeah.
24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Natural law, if naturalism is true, natural law is causing people to hold false beliefs. And so
Okay.
it's impossible to know which of those beliefs that it's determining you to have are true or false, because we know that it produces and determines false beliefs.
Okay. Yeah, that's okay. About the about those sick people. I'm gonna make a hypothesis here. Maybe there is a problem in their brains when where they are failing to properly express their beliefs, but they it's not that they have false beliefs about being in pain. It's that they are speaking incoherent crap, using language wrong, saying crap, but they don't really have that belief, like for real. I don't know. You know,
Well, I mean,
that's just I don't know. No, but
it means, yeah, somebody could be saying I'm in pain and they could be lying.
yeah,
They,
no,
mi-
yeah,
they might not have a real belief that they're in pain. They just might believe that they have the belief.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
there's also, but no matter what option you take, you still cannot escape the fundamental principle that if naturalism is true, then all of our beliefs are caused by natural law, and natural law causes human beings to hold false beliefs on a regular basis. You can set your watch by it. Now, does natural law cause people to hold true beliefs as well? Yes. But that's just saying that natural law causes all beliefs. And so if natural law causes all beliefs, including the belief that you're in pain, and natural law then natural law causes all your false beliefs because we all have false beliefs. And so if that's true, natural law is deceptive. And if it's deceptive, it's untrustworthy, it's unreliable. We can't rely on natural law to give us true, justified beliefs. And that's what knowledge is. And so when you guys talked about, I think it was Kelly that said, well, I feel pain. And so therefore, naturalism doesn't destroy my knowledge. That's simply not true. It's simply because the belief that you're in pain is caused by natural law. Natural law causes all of your beliefs. And if natural law causes all of your beliefs, then natural law causes all of your false beliefs. And if natural law causes all of your false beliefs, then it is deception. It's deceptive. And if it's deceptive, it's untrustworthy. And so what you have is you have a mechanism for belief formation that is absolutely, categorically unreliable, which makes knowledge impossible. And the idea that we feel pain doesn't solve that problem. It's just part of the problem. It doesn't solve it.
Yeah, yeah, I see.
Tell me what you think.
Yeah, no, I don't. It just doesn't seem possible to me to that you wrongly believe that you are in pain, right? Like, how could you possibly be wrong about that, right? You either feel pain or not. But if you're sick in the head, right? Maybe everything is different. I don't know.
Well, I mean, I think that it's reliable. I think that when we feel pain, I think that we have a reliable way of verifying whether we're in pain. Because
Right.
if I think I'm feeling pain, I can go to the doctor and I can have the doctor examine me and I can have him identify some kind of a neurological process that is actually producing my sensation of pain. That it has a physiological source and a physiological explanation. But that's only possible if naturalism is false. And I think it is possible. I think it's true. I think we can have knowledge because the idea that we can't know anything is self-contradictory and therefore false. So so I agree with you, Juan, when you say I have a sensation of pain and I know that I have a sensation of pain, even if my sensation of pain doesn't have a physiological cause. I still have a belief that I have a sensation of pain and I have direct awareness that I do have this sensation. And if I want to know whether or not it's being caused by something physiological or whether it's just mental, then I'll go to the doctor and I'll verify it. And all of these things are possible only because naturalism is false. And if naturalism is false, then atheism is false. Because if God does not exist, naturalism is true. If naturalism is false, it follows that God exists. So this entire discussion about knowledge is a defeater for atheism and is support for the existence of God. And it all falls into place as soon as you reject naturalism. Suddenly, knowledge is not impossible anymore. And that is one of the main ideas that I try to convey to skeptics and non-believers and atheists and agnostics and whatever they want to call themselves, because their commitment to naturalism is destroying their entire worldview. It obliterates their entire worldview.
Can I just ask you folks? I know one, the whole thing, the topic that he did with Godless Granny was on tag and the transcendental argument for God. I'm just kind of curious, is there a difference between presuppositional apologetics and the argument you're making as an evidentialist here, or like what are the similarities and or differences as you see it? And then I'll ask one the same thing. Uh, yeah, like are you engaging in presuppositional apologetics here? Or?
No, I'm a classical apologist, and the term evidentialism can be a little problematic in my view, because even the presuppositionalist considers certain things as evidence for God's existence. There's no such thing as pure presuppositional apologetics. But I think that if you do have pure presuppositionalism, it would be circular, and that's one of the reasons why I kind of stay away from presuppositional apologetics. Classical apologetics is where you is where you examine the propositions about ultimate reality from a purely logical a priori angle, and you assess whether or not the idea that God exists can be logically coherent or is logically self-defeating or leads to false propositions and is therefore indirectly self-defeating. So that's kind of where my apologetic is. My apologetic is that we argue from reason that we cannot escape to the existence of God or the non-existence of God, and we examine those two propositions: God exists, God does not exist. We examine them in the light of reason, in the light of logical coherence, and we can reason that if God does not exist, then naturalism is true, and naturalism is the idea that the physical universe, the natural world, and the laws that govern it are all that exist. There is no such thing as a supernatural. There's no supernatural event. There's no supernatural cause. There's no supernatural being. And if that's the case, then natural law governs everything. Natural law determines everything. And if natural law determines everything, it determines all of our beliefs. If it determines our beliefs, it determines our false beliefs. If it determines our false beliefs, it's deceptive. If it's deceptive, it's unreliable. If it's unreliable, human knowledge is impossible. But the idea that human knowledge is impossible is self-defeating itself. And so therefore, we have to reject the idea that human knowledge is impossible, and therefore we have to reject the idea that naturalism is true, because if naturalism is true, human knowledge is impossible. So if we're going to reject naturalism, then we have to reject theism, because naturalism is a consequent of the non-existence of God. So if God does not exist, naturalism is true. Naturalism is false, therefore God exists. That's classical apologetics.
All right, and one, I'm just curious, how are you reading this? So I know a lot of skeptics kind of compare Alvin Plantinga's type reasoning with, tag or presuppositionalism. So where do you see any similarities and or differences in the argument Phil was giving, kind of thing, versus presuppositional stuff?
Yeah, funny you mentioned Plantinga. I was just gonna say that. I was going to say Plantinga has very similar arguments, basically the same. Really, he says that if our faculties and belief making organs are made by a process of evolution and random natural selection, then they are fallible, and therefore that's a self-defeater that defeats also the proposition naturalism is true, right?
Yeah, that's
Because,
his evolutionary argument against naturalism.
yes.
And when I bring up my argument, people say, "Oh, well, you're just echoing Plantinga because you're just giving me the evolutionary argument against naturalism." Well, it's not quite the same thing. It's in the same family, but I don't bring evolution into the discussion. So for Plantinga, evolution is a component of his argument, the evolutionary argument against naturalism. It's why it's called the evolutionary argument against naturalism. But I think Plantinga is still right, and sometimes people appeal to Plantinga when I say that the definition of knowledge should be justified true belief, and that justified means rational justification. And they bring up Plantinga and say, well, Phil, what about warranted true belief? Isn't that an alternate to rational justification? And that is a topic in and of itself. That's a debate in and of itself. But they can't bring that up in order to defeat my argument against naturalism, because Plantinga makes the same argument against naturalism. It's just in a different form.
Gotcha. Yeah, but one, where do you see in terms of presuppositionalism then? Because Plantinga is not a presuppositionalist. Where do you see the similarities and differences on your?
Yeah, it has some similarities, but it's not exactly the same. Yeah, it's not exactly the same thing, right? But it's a little similar. Yeah, that's all.
Yeah. Well,
Okay.
let me go on to just one more. We're gonna be up to 3 hours here pretty soon if we're not careful. I just want to talk about one more issue, and then if we have time, I'll scroll through the questions to see if we can see some questions that might be productive. I think that this is an idea that you brought up with Kelly, and Kelly was extremely enchanted by it. And it basically goes like this: how could God create time if time is required for creation? And do you remember this conversation, Juan? And so I wanted to talk about this idea that in order for creation to occur, time is a precondition for creation. And I would point out a couple of different facts here. One of them is that time is required for creation for contingent beings. And so if I think, okay, I'm going to create a song. I'm a musician. Been a musician all my life. And I decide one day that I'm going to create a song today. Now, do I need time in order to create that song? And I think that you would answer yes, and I think I would agree with you. I think that I need time to create a song, to write a song. I need time to create whatever it is that human beings create. I'm gonna have to take some time in order to create that thing. Now, why does it take time to create something for me, a human being? And I think the answer to that is because I'm a contingent being. I'm not a necessary being. I'm not an omnipotent being. I am not a supernatural being that has unlimited supernatural power. And so the idea that God cannot create time because creation requires time is incoherent, because you're making a category mistake there, I think. I think that you're treating God as though he was a contingent, finite, limited, time-bound being. And if he's not, then it doesn't require time for him to create time. A supernatural being can create time because he's a supernatural being. And he's not a contingent being. And so if that's the case, then I think that this doesn't function as an objection to God creating contingent reality, because if God exists and he created the universe and created everything, the space-time continuum, then he would necessarily be a supernatural being, because he's bringing natural law into existence that didn't exist before, and that includes the space-time continuum, the reality and the coherence and the unification of space, time, matter, and energy. So I think that's another one of these objections that I think that anyone who takes it seriously should drop, because it doesn't really, it makes a deep fundamental category mistake that I think that people should avoid if they ever want to try to come up with some kind of a coherent, coherent objection to theism. So tell me where that lands. I'm into
Yeah, I mean,
landing today.
yeah, I mean, there are two senses on, when I say it takes time to do something. Like, if I'm going to, I don't know, to fold this piece of paper, like I'll say I'm going to make an airplane, right? One thing is that the me making that airplane took 4 seconds. It took four seconds from the point I began making that airplane to the point I finished making that airplane. And another sense when is that the another difference is that for the act could be instant. It could be like instantly. I can instantly make the airplane. But what I mean by takes time is that time needs to be flowing in order for there to be a before the airplane and after the airplane, right? So at time t, at time uh, one, for example, the airplane was made means before time one, the airplane didn't exist, right? In that sense, is when time needs to be flowing, is what I mean. Not that the process itself takes time, right? It's not that God needs to put the mountains together and the water and that takes time. It's that time needs to exist, so it makes sense to even make sense of an action, right? So there is a before the action and there is a after the action is done, right? So there are different senses to time.
Okay, so time there must be a flow of time in order to create the flow of time.
In order to create the world, by the way, I was saying that for God to create the world, there needs to be a flow of time. There needs to be an actor before the world or an after the world. My question was like, how do you explain that creation is that the world is not like eternal or co-eternal with the Father if he had always existed and has eternally had the desire to create, the capacity to create, and he has always existed eternally? Then how come the universe is also not like eternal in some way, right?
Okay, well there's an extremely meaningful and effective answer to that question. Whenever you have the necessary conditions for something to exist, will it exist? And the answer is no. If you have the sufficient conditions for something to exist, will it exist? The answer is no.
No.
You have to have both the necessary and the sufficient conditions for something to exist. So if we're talking about God's desire to create, that is a sufficient condition for the universe to exist.
Yeah.
But the universe is not eternal.
Yeah.
Therefore, time and the world had to have had a beginning. So both the necessary and sufficient conditions for the existence of the universe have not always existed. They have not always been there.
Right.
And what that does is that's part of the Calem cosmological argument. What that does is that establishes that there was a third thing that that had to occur in order for creation to occur. And that is a decision. And what it does is it shows us that there not only is there an all-powerful, all-knowing God, but that God is personal, because only persons make decisions. Now, if you want to reject that idea, then you are forced to accept that time has always existed and that the universe has always existed, that the flow of time has always been there. And if the flow of time was necessary in order to create the world, and the world, by the way, involves time. The beginning of creation is the beginning of time. But if you say that the flow of time is necessary in order to have a flow of time, that's self-contradictory. But if time always existed, then time stretches back to an infinite past. And if time stretches back to an infinite past, then the present moment could never arrive. And so it is logically impossible for the space-time continuum, the universe is made up of space, time, matter, and energy, to have always existed. Therefore, it had to have had a beginning. Now, when we say the universe had a beginning, we're not saying that there was a time in which the universe didn't exist. We're saying that God is logically prior to the existence of time and the existence of the universe, not temporally prior, logically prior, metaphysically prior. And so the only alternative to the idea that the flow of time has to exist before creation can exist, the only alternative is that the universe is eternal. But the idea that the universe is eternal is absolutely logically impossible. So that proves that the flow of time is not required in order for creation to exist or for creation to occur. It proves it not, it doesn't prove it empirically. It improves it in an a priori logical way. So we don't have to examine any scientific principles. We don't have to have any empirical data that shows that time is not necessary for the creation of the world. We can prove it logically by examining the contradiction and seeing if that contradiction is logically coherent. If that contradiction is not logically coherent, then this idea that time is required for the creation of the world is necessarily false.
Yeah, you're right about that. If an infinite past is, no, it's impossible, then you will have to say somehow that there was a beginning, a first event,
Yeah.
or whatever.
We
Yeah.
don't have to explain how God can create the world without the flow of time already existing or being prior to
Yeah.
it. We don't have to explain that. And we may never be able to explain that. But we can know that God can create the world without the flow of time prior to that, because the alternative is logically impossible.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not sure if I agree that an infinite past is impossible. There was recently a debate between William Lake Craig and Alex Malpass, which I think is the best at this topic. By the way, Alex Malpass was the one coaching me on our debate. He did a little bit. So if you have time, maybe look at that up. It was a very good debate. I think Alex Malpass is the best at defending this infinite past view. So, but yeah, it does seem to me like it's very counterintuitive and very problematic as well. So you just have to say that somehow it was possible that there was a first act without time
Yeah,
flowing.
and what happens is that what people end up doing is they end up trying to just simply run away from the issue. No one has actually, I don't think anybody has actually given us a model for how it's possible for time to stretch back to an infinite past and yet still move forward. Because that is not an empirical model. That is a logical model. And the only way that you can escape that problem is to redefine something. Something has to be redefined. And or the other way to escape it is to simply say, we're going to explain it with no explanation. We're going to say it's a brute fact the time stretches back to an infinite past. And if they want to propose that, then what I'm going to say in return is, okay, well then are you ready to become a theist? Because I'm just going to tell you that God is a brute fact, and that you have to believe in Him because it's a brute fact. It doesn't require an explanation. So, Dale, you've been pretty quiet here. Why don't you can chime in real quick, and then let's take some questions, and then let's wrap this up. We're at the 3 hour mark.
Yeah, so I agree in terms of creation. I agree with Dr. William Lane Craig's view that God was timeless without creation and became temporal with creation. And there is this thing called simultaneous causation that occurs right in time, right? So you can one thing can cause another thing at the same time. It's not the case even in physics that a cause has to temporally precede its effect. There is simultaneous causation out there. So yeah, it makes perfect sense as to how a timeless cause could create a temporal effect, um, and that sort of thing. And from there, time starts moving on ever since. On the A theory of time is what I take. Phil goes for the P theory of time, unless you've changed it. Phil has invented his own theory of time. Maybe you guys would like to discuss that sometime. But yeah. Other than that, nothing much to add. I kind of, like I agree with what this point, what Phil said about the infinite regress, that being a problem for the Kalam cosmological argument and stuff like that. I don't agree with atheists. I don't think that the actual infinite exists, and it hasn't been demonstrated to exist. I saw there was a comment from James in the audience earlier talking about how uh, the actual infinite has been proven. That's not true. That it only works in axiomatic set theory. It can't actually exist in reality without entailing inevitable logical contradictions and that sort of thing. So yeah, that's all I have to say about it. So yeah.
You know what I think I'll do just real quick is just take one question. It says, if you dip a bucket into a wave, is it still part of the wave? Hebrew speaks in waves, Greek and English speaks in buckets. And I guess the way that I would respond to this, and I'll give you guys a chance to weigh in, but the way that I would respond to this is that none of these ideas are rely on what Hebrew and Greek words mean. Uh, I think there was another comment by the same person that said that Hebrew has no verbal no verbal tool to describe the Trinity or some of these other Trinitarian ideas. And I guess my reply is that Hebrew doesn't need we don't need a Hebrew word to describe the Trinity for us. We didn't get that. We didn't get the idea of the Trinity from the Hebrew language. We got it from what the New Testament teaches, and it teaches in in mostly in the Greek language, as far as the New Testament is concerned, that Jesus is God, the Holy Spirit is God, the Father is God, and if all three are God, and we believe in Jewish monotheism, then the Trinity is the only way that we can navigate those waters. And so I don't know that this really this debate is really about Hebrew vocabulary. I just don't think it is, but you guys can push back on me if you want. So
Yeah, I don't. I, okay, what are you going? Well,
you,
I don't know about every vocabulary, but okay, if you dip a bucket into a wave, is it still part of the wave? I think if by bucket you mean the metal part of the bucket. If you dip it into a wave, I think the bucket is not part of the wave, right? I think just like an external thing inside the wave. But this gets very tricky. Like if the bucket has water, if you pour that water into the wave, does the water become part of the wave? I think yes, obviously because it's the same substance. But then it gets tricky when you get like into a gray area. If the water has a little bit of sand, and there is sand like floating, what is this part of the wave? Where maybe the wave had a little bit of sand already, So is that like technically part of the wave, or is the wave like one thing and then the sun that is carrying like another thing? I don't know. This gets tricky at
Yeah,
some point.
I don't see how this is relevant to the Trinity because buckets and waves are not persons. They don't have a will. They don't communicate, and so I just don't see how that's relevant. I was really mostly interested in the idea of Hebrew vocabulary here. So, uh, and but there was another question that was notated as a question colon, and now I can't find it. Bear with me for just a second here. Okay. Yep, same person. Thank you for joining us, by the way. I don't know who this is, but thank you for joining us. I appreciate it. Says even several non-Trinitarian logicians say it can be described without contradiction, but that doesn't mean it's logical. Is there a syllogism either of you think is possible? And I assume that the question is it possible to come up with a syllogism that shows that Trinitarian logic is not incoherent, or that it's logical? And I'm not sure that there is a syllogism other than the fact that we're simply applying definitional meaning to these words and these ideas. So if you can demonstrate that something is not logically incoherent, or that it's not illogical, then you have automatically demonstrated that it is logical. You simply you simply removed the idea of being not logical from the equation, and then what you have, the remainder is going to be that it's logical. In other words, it's logically consistent and contains no contradictions. And that's what it means to be logical, as far as I'm concerned. That's what I learned when I studied logic at the University of Iowa, and the University of Colorado, and they all said this pretty much the same thing. Part of the definition of something being logical is that it doesn't contain any logical contradictions, and so therefore it's logically consistent. Now, whether or not it's true is another matter, but we're only asking whether something is logical. So
Yeah,
there.
it's got to be, in order to be logical. My debate was on the strict logical coherence, right? So for that, it has to cohere with the fundamental laws of logic, which include the logical law of non-contradiction, but aren't limited to that. There's excluded middle and the law of identity,
Right.
which is crucial for Trinitarian debates, right?
Yep.
But the way I'm interpreting his question with this, I think he means by logical, he means logical to believe it's factual, that it's true. I think that's
Like reasonable.
Yeah, I think is it reasonable, right? Like, do you have a sound argument to believe this? And that's why he's talking about syllogisms. So on that front, I would appeal to number one, Richard Swinburne can give a syllogism of his argument from actualizing selfless love, requiring three perfect beings that are actually selflessly loving each other. So that could be converted into a syllogism. Secondly, I myself was giving a syllogism based on the Bible, the New Testament scriptures. We didn't finish that, but I actually had a series. It has a sub argument with four premises, and then two sub conclusion. A sub conclusion, and then a couple more premises, and then the final main conclusion, which argues that the Trinity monotheism model is true, or is the best explanation for the biblical data, is the conclusion I end off with. So yeah, there's at least two arguments with syllogisms, and I'm sure other people have provided others. If we wanted to argue a logical argument for the Trinity, people can do that.
Yeah, but I think that this question really was limited to whether or not there's a syllogism that could possibly show that the Trinity is not illogical. but there may be more to it than that. They may have meant something broader, like what you're talking about, Dale. And if they did, then your answer is spot on. I think
Okay,
there are
well,
plenty. I think there are
if
plenty of
that's the way,
arguments.
how about this for a syllogism, a simple modus ponens or something, right? If the Trinity is logical, then it will not, it will cohere with all of the, it will not violate any of the logical laws of logic.
Mhm.
The Trinity does not violate the laws of logic, therefore
Yep.
therefore it's logical to believe. So
Yep.
right there.
Yep.
It's very easy to make syllogisms and stuff, right? There's
Mhm.
even this thing we teach our students. My first year university students, when I taught critical thinking, we would teach them about this thing called cheap validity, where you can just make a valid argument. It's very easy to do and stuff like that. But the trick comes in: are those premises sound, or are they deductively strong? You want a deductively strong argument
Right.
when you do stuff. So yeah.
Mhm. All right. Well, I think we better knock off here. We're at 3 hours and 10 minutes, and I've been talking to a lot of colleagues lately about podcasts, and I have been I have been encouraged to keep my podcast episodes shorter.
Yeah, yeah. I also think, I think when people later watch this, like the live audience already watch it, but when people later watch this video and they see it's over it's like 3.5 hours, and I think people is going to say like, no, I don't have time to watch all of that, right? They don't click on it. I think that's what happens. I will agree with keeping it under 3 hours. I think 3 hours is where people like say like, oh no, that's too much.
Well, I'm actually leaning toward keeping them under 2 hours, to be real honest.
Yeah,
So
even
uh,
better. I think 1.5 hours is what I usually aim to actually. Yeah.
yeah, and so it was probably a little misguided for me to try to try to address all of these different points. Maybe I should have just kept it to the logic of the Trinity by itself. I'm learning as I go here, and but if somebody does want to watch a long video like this and they don't want it to take so long, then my suggestion would be to crank up the speed, and make the do it at twice the speed, and see if they can pick out all of the words, and that'll be a good exercise. So all right, let's wrap it up, guys. I appreciate it very much. So I always enjoy both of you being on the channel with me. You sharpen me, you challenge me, you help me improve, you help me grow, and I that means a lot to me, more than I could probably express in just a short period of time. Just in 3 hours, just not enough. So uh, Juan,
Yeah.
thanks for your engagement, and thanks for your willingness to consider some of these alternatives to some of the things that you discussed with Godless Granny. And I think that there are real alternatives, and if anybody is ever willing to look at alternatives like this, it's going to be you, because you have such an open mind and a warm heart that is fertile ground for productive conversations like that. And so I appreciate it very much, and I appreciate your time. So
Yeah, thanks for having me as well. I appreciate that. That's
yeah.
very cool.
And thank you, Dale. Yeah, you always bring a whole lot of meat to the discussion, and it's really important, and it helps round out everything. So thank you
Yeah.
for your contribution today. And if you have any closing comments or upcoming events that you want to share, then do go ahead and do that, and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah, dude. So for my audience, as I mentioned to you, I'm winding down in terms of the podcast for the summer, just to work on personal things such as my Shroud of Turin book, which I finally want to get finished for you guys. But even still, even though I'm on vacation, I've still got a few podcast promises in the works. So you're going to see me again next week. I've heard from Dr. Gary Habermas. We're aiming for Friday the 15th to do part 2 of 3 on his Resurrection Magnum Opus on Volume 2. But just pray for Gary, because we were supposed to do it this week, but things keep coming up. His wife obviously has very serious cancer at this time and stuff, so he's revealed this publicly. So I just want to say, for Phil's audience and for Juan's audience, if obviously if even if you're an atheist, you can pray, if God, if you exist or something. But please keep Gary and his wife in your prayers, because their situation is very serious and that sort of thing. But yeah,
Oh,
the
I'll
plan of
review that.
action. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I appreciate.
Okay. Definitely add that to the prayer list. All right. Thanks, Dale. I appreciate it. And Juan, do you have anything upcoming that you want to tell people about?
Oh, yeah, I haven't reached a career back in the channel. I haven't had him in
Oh,
several
I'm
months, but
sorry.
One, can I just say, are you rich? Because I wouldn't mind getting $150 for coming on as a
yeah,
guest. So you have to pay him
yeah,
every time.
yeah. I get
Gary's
a fraction.
ridiculous.
I actually those videos do so well that I even get a part of the money back. Like not everything, but some at least I get some money from it. Yeah.
Oh, okay,
So
okay.
this time I want to have him live. I want to have him on the topic of undesigned coincidences. And I never done this live, so I'm going to do it the first time. So I'm going to see if I get a lot of people and they get super chats and so on, then maybe it will get even
I'm gonna
more
have to
money.
tell Lydia to be in the live chat to
Yeah,
scold him when he gets stuff wrong.
yeah, yeah. And yeah, that's right. And maybe tomorrow I will debate a guy on the tag argument. Maybe I say maybe because last week we were supposed to debate, but he canceled. So I don't know if he's going to do it tomorrow or not. I don't know. Maybe we will see.
Well, I think there are more competent scholars that could do discussions like this than Richard Carrier, and they would do it for free. So, uh, but
Yeah,
that'll be interesting, and hopefully I'll be able to. Maybe I can be a fly on the wall. I'm not sure. So,
sure.
but thank you so much, you guys. We're going to wrap it up, and I want to thank for the people who were willing to hang with us for 3 hours and 15 minutes here. So thanks for everybody, and we'll sign off, and we'll see you next time.
God bless. Take care, Ringo Cat.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thanks.
I see him in the audience. All right, bye bye, everybody.